Welcome to the Cryptozoology Show with your host, the Cryptozoologist. This show updates a Bigfoot missing and the Bigfoot connection. Uh, you might have seen with all these people, a lot of people covered these fascinating 411. There's a whole bunch of books written by this guy, David Paulides. He's a former sort of detective, and he started investigating all through these different forests. Now, unknown to myself or to him, these sort of things have also sort of interested me, but I've collected literally gazillions of reports of other sorts of ones like this, not in national forests, but in sort of rural towns and stuff where they had sort of weird Bigfootish like sort of things to them or other strange stuff. And I've been doing this for decades, so this is an interesting sort of thing. So when I started catching some of these new ones, I decided to sort of look up some of the ones that I had laying around and just chuck some stories out to you here that sort of all correlate with this. Now, there's 5 million people. You have these is 10 zillion shows where the guy claims that Bigfoot was first reported in the 50s. Then other people would say, thousands of years and all this kind of stuff. But the pure, truthful, 1,000,000% reality is that since even biblical in the Bible, they mention sort of like hairy, sort of giant, like sort of things like this and all that sort of thing. But besides all that, from Enkidu to all kinds of other ones, for sure, for thousands of years, wild men in different areas worldwide have been reported, all the way from Hawaii to any kind of place you could humanly think of, because this is a fact and people are just ignoring these sort of things. There's all kinds of already fossilized sort of bones that aren't some very old that are laying around of giant like bones, smaller like sort of people and different stuff that all live in our caving systems, and they still continue to do so. And unfortunately, many of these sort of missing, mysterious disappearances do actually have to do with these sorts of things. And it's sort of a very interesting sort of a things that we're going to go through here. You'll also see that a lot of people claim that the earliest sort of newspaper reports in the United States is like anywhere from 1879 to 1859. I've seen them quote, many other experts say 1839. All these people are completely like so far off the sort of beaten path. There's records back even from the 15th century or so of sort of early like newspapers that you can find over in Europe that mention these. But besides all them, in here, I know for sure there's at least several in the 1700s, which haven't still found at this moment. But I did find one right at the turn of the 1800, exactly in 1800. So definitely one of the earlier accounts in our sort of United States, Canada sort of stuff. But this sort of thing, and this goes back. This is and this is a thing for skeptics here. You're claiming that these things have never been caught. I'm sorry to tell you, they've been caught massive amounts of times now. And in fact, we're sitting in jail cells sometimes and stuff where they are this sort of thing. That's exactly what they are. It doesn't matter at the end of the day, like I said, whether or not there's a few kinds of these things floating around. They still have reality because there's actually already physical sort of skeleton skulls and different things. They're laying around in different parts of museums, everything from the Lovelock giants to different ones that prove everything from the Ibugogo to these different ones. You're actually now finding these skulls, right? And these people describe exactly what the size of the skulls that you're finding and things. It's just people are ignoring and sort of not wanting to take these things as, if you add it all up, this has 1,000,000 plus more for it, where if you put this in a court of law, this would be a lot more proof than what would be needed for people that are convicted all the time with the most circumstantial garbage evidence, yet they're still convicted for something, and this sort of thing. and this happens, and yet, if somebody came in with the amount of evidence like I've even covered on any of the shows, if you add all these up just because somebody says they couldn't be because they haven't seen one, they provide absolutely no evidence in the universe that they couldn't exist. And they pass these things all off as fruit juice gas and these different things, but these are not the case. And we're going to go through a lot of this sort of interesting stuff, some cryptid cats, things like this. I was going to do a much bigger show on them, and I probably will, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about, because a lot of these cryptid cats are also responsible for vanishings of people. Like, even though they claim the eastern cougar's been gone for many moons, this is not a fact. They never have been, never were, and never probably will be for quite some time to come, until Corona all melts us away or something, sort of thing. And but otherwise, these creatures are continuously, cats are very elusive. And they can hide very well. And out of all the sort of cryptid ones, these are the easiest ones to evade us. And new species of cats are still discovered from time to time. And there's all kinds of weird stuff. And many of them that were thought as myth are now reality. And this is the sort of thing. And many that used to be common, that I have pictures of. When I was a kid, I had old books that I collected back when I was a kid that were way decades earlier than that. And now many of these cats are supposedly extinct. I don't go for this extinct stuff too much, because too many times these guys are completely wrong. But when you call it extinction, it means that their numbers are getting so low that we're not being able to see them easily anymore. That's dangerous. They're still in trouble and actually could go extinct, right? But to state that, just because Bazoo went out and, waved his magic magnifying glass and walked through the forest for 2 days and said, I didn't see one. It doesn't work this way. These guys are trained in labs, and they really don't have much experience out in the wilderness. Like us, for instance, you get a guy like myself out in the water for like near probably about 150,000 plus hours by now, sort of idea, compared to sort of some guy that goes out even just on a weekend. If he goes out of the water in his entire lifetime, he wouldn't even reach 1/10 of that sort of amount, right? And this is the sort of thing, is that even people that think that they have a lot of sort of, experience on something may be very limited. So even though the guy's a scientist and he's done 20 trips out in the wilderness, it's really not, like, I mean, compared to a real wild ape man living in the woods that lives there 24 hours a day, knows all of his terrain ins and outs and all kinds of stuff, you're not knowledgeable compared to him. Right? And this is the sort of thing. There's a lot of stuff that people don't think about, and they refuse to sort of admit these things. But at the end, I want to suggest to you some stuff, especially young ladies. My mother told me this story when she was a young, about some camp, and for the life of me, I can't remember this girl's camp. But anyways, it was somewhere out in Ontario, and there was this story of this wild man that was around there, and this sort of, I know it's up around Christie Lake region somewhere, but it wasn't, I don't think it was actually on Christie Lake, but it was around there somewhere in this sort of region. And anyways, this young lady had went out of her tent and sort of just went to go to the bathroom like this. They found sort of weird sort of stuff around there, like as if something heavy had walked like all into the ground, but they couldn't tell what it was, and this sort of thing. And the girl was gone, like just completely vanished, right? And there's been all kinds of these weird ones like that, and this sort of stuff. And a lot of researchers are running out there hammering sort of wood and doing all these sorts of stuff. I'm telling you, these are, many of them are primitive actual humans, and they're outsmarting you. And even if they do hammer back, they're quite fully aware of you way before you're aware of them. It's only in unusual circumstances where you may be downwind from them, and different sort of things where he came at a certain bizarre angle, and he's busy, Mr. Bigfoot. Yeah, you know what I mean, sort of, he's doing his thing. looking up on the mountainous bush and he's eating something, and you just happen to come by, some fluke he notices you, and then he starts either scurrying or finds you threatening and maybe comes and attacks you. And probably a lot of people do vanish from these. We'll cover later on certain ones that are very highly probable that that's actually what it was. And so even though people tend to sort of they have this massive skeptical thing, I'm just going to show you with this small amount. And in my second book about the land monsters, I cover massive tons of these, like where there's people seemingly had vanished around a time, the same time that you're seeing these furry wild men in the caves and stuff like this. And it all sort of adds up, because some of the places that they find these people later, only a great ape, sort of a hairy big monkey man, could climb and traverse these kinds of things and could evade you, because they're way more sort of stronger. I also found this fascinating photograph that seems to have no sort of, I can't get an explanation for it. Somebody posted this weird picture, okay, and it's definitely can't be a guy in a suit. But it says gorilla going for a walk, and then it puts a question mark, like as if they don't know where this picture came from. Now, I'll show it to you, and it's fascinating because the terrain doesn't look like normal African gorilla terrain, and whatever this is, it's not a dude in a suit, I guarantee you that. So it does definitely look gorilla-ish. But anyways, you take a look at it after and see what you think of that. But see, all through Quebec, to every sort of places, there has been these random sort of bizarre murders, and people disappearing, and cattle, tons of cattle mutilations, way before these sort of chupacabra. Every investigator gets this wrong. They're so wrong on this. They all claim that chupacabra started in the 90s. I'm sorry to tell you, but I have records dating back all the way from the 17th, 16th, even 15th century of people being drained by blood by some kind of mysterious Bigfootish, werewolf-like sort of people, or very similar in tons of cattle. This is a common thing, actually. It's not uncommon. Why people all make these claims are just because some guy called something a chupacabra then, but the phenomena's been around for ages. There's different sorts of these. Some make them dog-like, some make them Bigfootish-like. But the point is that they do actually, these things exist, and there's been literally thousands of cattle worldwide that have mysteriously died in some strange ways from not a normal sort of hunting, sort of where a bear is tearing an ape apart or doing this and that, like a lot of weird stuff. So we're going to cover a lot of different sort of things like that. And as usual and always, because I'm doing some of these shows late at night and stuff like this, I was a lot of these I wasn't looking at when I was talking, doing these sort of shows. I don't usually look at the screen. I might be talking, doing something else, but I just keep this to go along, to keep what I wanted to say, and also for people, if they can't sort of hear well or different things, at least they get some sort of information. You know, it's too bad you couldn't do all these things and everything from Braille to everything. That's what these companies should have, is some instant translation of every sort of language in the planet, and Braille and all these stuff, so that all sort of human beings, even if the guy only gets a few, like I don't get that massive amount of sort of views compared to some of them stuff, but I don't have a budget like these people do, and a lot of things that we talk about here on this show is very controversial stuff. But you got to admit, though, like out of all the ones that you've seen so far, there's a lot of points that are put across here that you won't hear from others, and I backed this stuff up with a lot of different things on it. I also, but I mentioned about a 400 million year old hammer. And there was another one that was 450 million years old, so I said 18 times, but I should have said 16 times. Things like that. I do that once in a while. The Roger Patterson one, I always get excited with over the weight of that sort of thing. But no matter what, in the universe, as I explained in there, it's impossible that people on a horse, when they can only go down halfway in the ground, is what this creature was, no matter what. Even if the guy was a great big monster and they glued air to his body or something, or some wild giant lady, right? The point is no matter what, she couldn't hide this in her skin or anywhere on this planet, this extra amount of weightage that would require to make the depths of those footprints and stuff like that. And that's the thing is that no matter what anybody says, this is really like conclusive evidence sort of to me that you cannot, there is no other explanation except it's not a dude in a suit. You really are looking at a sort of, either a primitive human of some sort or a gigantopithecus or some kind of thing like that, whatever, right? Yeah, to me it doesn't matter because there seems to be several of these kinds of things, so it doesn't matter, like from werewolfish to whatever. It's all the same at the end of the day that if one of them exists, the rest do too. It's just their variants of them and that sort of thing like that. Some are smaller, some are taller, some are whatever, right? And that sort of thing. But basically, a lot of them are actually real wild human beings. They may be primitive wild human beings. They may even have DNA slightly different than us or whatever, like some of these findings that they found in the United States where they're a human, but they have a small, like a difference, variance, something like those Atacama munchkins and stuff like that. So, I mean, these things are here and are there. Of course, people probably living in strange environments like that, probably over time things do become slightly different or whatever, right? But the point is that people make tons of money by making Bigfoot mysterious or denying historical, factual things when really all along we've been catching them, we've had them in our jails, we've done all kinds of stuff, and you'll see this just even with the small amount that I put on here. And I wish researchers would stop claiming Bigfoot started in the 50s because it just shows how little people really do, how little they actually research and things like that, and how, wiki sort of relaxed they are. They just click on wiki and make a video in 10 minutes, right? I'm not into this. I want to show you real sort of interesting things, right? So anyways, are werewolves a Sasquatch getting us in our forest, and this sort of thing? And not only that, in our towns and things like this as well, there's a lot of mysterious sort of disappearances that we need another David Paulides sort of guy. I don't want to do this. I've investigated these things for decades, collecting these weird sort of vanishings and weird stuff. I'm interested in anything unusual and strange, right? But the thing is that I personally wouldn't want to sort of dedicate just only to that sort of field. And the depression of interviewing these families of their missing kids and stuff, it's not my sort of thing, right? So I'm much more interested in I don't mind sharing the sort of information and things that I've collected over the ages because it's good that sort of people sort of then other researchers out there, even if one little idea that I've given you might ended up being useful to you later, yeah, you know what I mean? Then bingo, maybe someday one or two of them will be caught and stuff like that. Just because simply the more you know about the whole sort of broad spectrum of it, then the better off you're going to be about the subject and more sort of knowledgeable about it and that sort of thing. And as I notice, as usual on this thing here, you can see 4 wrestling has got an extra. This is the wackiest thing. It's a much faster way than doing it the normal sort of presentations. But as far as this goes, you can fix spelling mistakes a million times, and for some reason the thing will still go right back over. But anyway, I'm not going to stop this video for that sort of. So cryptid cats here. We'll first cover that. Some of the odd cryptid cats from North America and from some other countries, from the Mngwa to a bizarre cat that attacks cactus, right? Also a mystery local cat puma sightings and things like that. Here's sadly the ghostly lion in the back there, sort of and thing, and our lions and different ones here are getting rarer by the second. A lot of people may not know that, but even some lions that were thought extinct for like over like 1,000 years and stuff like that, and things like that. they were actually kept by early circuses and actually still exist, some of them, of earlier sorts that were held in Russian circuses and different things. And this may be what happened with these mammoths and unicorns, because which I'm going to do another show about that sort of weird other giant cryptids and weird stuff. And I'm going to show you this queen that actually owns some. And there's all kinds of portraits. So there's no way those guys, a queen's portrait sort of guy where he has to make her very accurate, showing what she's doing and the different sort of stuff throughout her day, and this sort of thing to make these paintings. This guy's got a mammoth here, right? And so, like, I mean, he's showing them. They mentioned that this queen had some of them in some kind of menagerie zoo of some sort. And this is very feasible that for thousands of years they might have been tamed like elephants, and actually some were kept as pets. So yeah, maybe the most of the wild ones got killed off, but maybe at least some of them actually survived up until hundreds of years ago with this queen, at least, anyways, right? And different lion cat species can be invasive. Some are thought to be gone, and then all of a sudden, like the Sinai leopard. Can you imagine with all the over in the Sinai there, with all this sort of warrings and all these different things that have went on, and yet this creature still, they had to put camera traps there for years, and these were early ones, right? And then all of a sudden, one of these dudes just pop up out of there from outer space right on the screen. They couldn't believe it. It just blew their minds, because, they thought that this cat was extinct many moons ago, right? And this is the thing is that these guys with the same thing with the thylasin and all of these creatures actually know these camera traps are there. They actually do. And that's amazing. And even these sort of ones that aren't that swift know about this, seemingly, but especially the great apes and the human Bigfootish sorts, they know this most of all. And I suspected this, but these researchers had done this sort of study not that long ago, and they found this to be sort of years of doing these trail cams, that every time these sort of great apes and different ones knew that the cameras were there and evaded them. So this is fascinating sort of stuff here, that you're actually, and if they're able to do this right away, where obviously they've never had too much, let's say, interaction, they'd have no real reason to originally fear it when the first one came out, except the fact that they could smell humans off of it and things like that. So keep these things in mind, that even with our trail cams and all these kinds of stuff, a lot of these creatures may possibly just actually be able to smell us, right? So that's another sort of thing. But it's very interesting. There's a lot of weird sort of things going out in our world. I'll tell you that. But anyways, here we'll start off with the mystery cats here. Let's start off with the first mystery cat I ever heard of back in the 60s, called the Mngwa. It was in that sort of Gardner Souls book that I was mentioning there, a very fun sort of early cryptozoology book. And this astounding cat is said to live in the mountains, thick forests of Africa, especially in Tanzania area, said to be striped with gray sort of silver fur, and the fur is said to be brindled. Said to reach often larger than a typical lion. Many deaths have been reported caused by it sneaking down at night, attacking villagers from the mountains. Intriguing evidence, including unidentified silver, a sort of grayish hair that was found grasped in this policeman's hand. He was one of the guards working around sort of the village. And this one that sort of came down and attacked him, said to be possibly have like saber-tooth-like features. Although modern reports seem to be slim, this cat for sure likely exists and possibly still does. I mean, it's always consistent. He's bigger, sort of, than a lion, sort of like, and I mean, he's quite big, right? So some are suspecting it could be an off-colored lion and things, but I mean, it seems his terrain's weird and everything about him, and he only comes out at night and stuff like that. So he may be a nocturnal tiger of some sort, even possibly, of some kind of thing like that, of some kind of early sort of either saber-toothy sort of type of one or something like this. It's hard to know these ones because a lot of people make these guesses about that, but I'm not going to go that far because, I mean, it could be one that we don't know of. It could be one in a fossil record. I mean, it's hard to know, right? Cats and other creatures, as long as it's the same family, can adapt and change probably fairly a lot quicker than we possibly think that they could. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. But I certainly believe in this one. I think it's highly probable, and especially the fur that was never identified and some of the other things, and so many deaths attributed to it. And that sort of thing, it certainly has some sort of a validity to it, and a lot of giant footprints were found that are bigger than a lion, sort of, and things like that. So enough sort of evidence out there, but that's somewhat what he may look like somewhere in the sort of range, right? So fascinating sort of a creature. This one here, the Alaskan white tiger, their white death, they call them, and things like that. This mysterious giant cat for hundreds of years from Alaska, Northwest Territories, Antarctica, even a giant cat, typically white, sometimes like with stripes in it, sometimes not as much, but seemingly like usually white. Okay, has been witnessed by natives to trappers. Deaths and disappearances have been attributed to it. Even mentions in early explorers' journals. There was this one guy, he was some kind of early explorer, and for life of me, I can't think of the guy's name, but he had this book from like it was 1800s sort of thing, and he was in somewhere in a sort of Alaska, and he was with this girl, and the girl had sort of just went to go around this sort of thing, I guess, to go to the bathroom or something, and all of a sudden he saw this great big giant sort of white cat, and it was monstrous, and it kind of ran up and it grabbed the girl, and the thing grabbed her and took off and just started running with her, sort of, and that was it. She was gone, right? And he watched them all sort of disappear through all these ice crevices, and that was the end of her, right? Sort of thing like that. So what my suspect is that there's been quite a few of these sort of sightings over the ages. What if it's possible that, I mean, Alaska's not really that far here from Russia and this sort of thing like that. It would be feasible that maybe either some relic ones had sort of been living there for ages in very small numbers, and I don't know, some kind of weird terrain, the cave-like sort of ice-like sort of stuff that's out there, right? And things like that, caves, different things. Who knows? They might sort of adapt different slightly, or that there are sort of ones that somehow drifted across and got to there and occasionally visit once in a while, sort of thing, and it's beyond their normal sort of range. So some though mention them to have like big fangs, like as if they're a saber-toothed tiger sort of thing. So hard to know, right? But another interesting cryptid cat that I certainly believe in. I mean, just like the giant wolves reported there and stuff like that. I mean, some of them are just titanic, 7-8 feet sort of long, right? And I mean, just monsters, like monsters. And I showed you on my other show that one that is a titan like that. I mean, this kid's a big sort of, healthy looking boy here, sort of like a young fellow, right? And I mean, he's not small, this guy. And I mean, this wolf's standing over him and he looks like a minnow to him almost, right? So, I mean, that's one monster wolf, man. Right? Sort of stuff, and that's his buddy, right? But I mean, that guy is like the size of a dire wolf would be, right? So, I mean, it's very feasible these stories are actually true, including I showed you on a clip of this giant sort of one that was out in Saskatchewan that was a film that was black. And I mean, this thing shrinks this guy's dog and makes it look like a minnow, man. I mean, it was absolutely an astonishing monster, right? And he's pitch black, but I mean, they come in different color variants, right? And these sort of things. So, I mean, it's just another interesting cryptid out there that likely exists. And but I suspect more that it actually are sort of Siberian tigers off their regular sort of course, or that there's relic population of them that might slightly be different, but they might have came from them. You know, that would be my guess, sort of like on that sort of range, like that possibly. But I mean, it's very apparently they're quite big though. There, like when they are seen, so maybe even bigger than the typical ones over in Russia or something. It's hard to know. I mean, these stories are vague quite often, and a lot of them are older ones and things like that. So it's hard to know. But certainly, that's a wonderful beast. Now, anybody could shoot one of them. Look at those. I mean, they're so beautiful. I mean, how could anybody want to kill? Like I said, if he's gonna come and eat you in a second, you got no choice. Yeah, that's different. But not when, I mean, just to go hunting for something like that. I mean, wow. I mean, how could you want to take that off the earth? We need stuff like that. I mean, if they're not in balance, then the rest of the creatures aren't in balance either, right? That's the whole thing, you know. It's they have a right to live just as much as anybody else does, right? And we owe it to creatures like this not to pollute our lands and our waters and everything else that we're doing, right? This is why we get these corona-like things and all this stuff, because of our own stupidity. We allow greedy people to run us, keep filthing up our waters and everything else, and not sort of caring about the things that are proper. And even for all the people that do want to be ecological and all that sort of stuff, they follow too much gobbledygook, everything from global warming and to everything else. I don't even hear a peep about global warming now, right? Because everybody's into corona, right? But I mean, all these things, no matter what these guys would do, even if they tax everybody to death with sort of carbon taxing and everything else, it would never solve these issues. I'm an historian. I've looked back at weather patterns for thousands of years, and they go up and down like this. I do not believe whatsoever, and I mean whatsoever below zero, that any of these things have much to do with sort of the smog up in the air or these sorts of things. I kind of doubt that. It's much more to do with just sort of cyclical sort of things that happen throughout history. Like a lot of people don't realize this, but even in New York State, there was like a friggin' ice age for about 10 years in the 1700s, where it was frozen most of the time. This is what happened over sort of in Europe after the Black Plague, where I suspect that this is why dragons quickly died out, and they were flushed out of caves and things like this because of freezing cold and lack of food. Europe used to be a lot warmer, and before that, these dragons may have not even lived there, but sort of expanded their range from other places in the earlier times, and went to these sort of things because it was warmer and you would travel, right? It's like anything else. I mean, when you get overpopulated in a spot, you move on to the next, right? And they build out a niche into that, just like humans do, or anything else. That's how animals have spread all over the sort of world. And another thing to, like I said about this flood stuff, you can find deer all over the place. You notice there's sturgeon and every sort of thing like this pretty well worldwide as some kind of cooler like sort of stuff. Because at one time all these fish were saltwater fish and the things started drying out and they adapted to it and got trapped in these different sort of lakes. You can find Quebec like Arctic char in landlocked lakes here in our region that are the most southern sort of ones that they are, and they're extremely rare. I fished in this lake, okay, now get a load of this. They had tried one time before, 25 years previously. Nobody had even knew about it, but the Quebec government had tried to stock a few Arctic char in this lake. And I went along and I'm fishing in there, and bang, I got this nail, this hit, and I reel in this beautiful fish. He was near about 4 pounds. And the second I seen him coming up, I said, "Oh my God, it's an Arctic char in it," because I knew what they were, right? But I mean, I didn't get rarely in my entire life to go up to sort of this far north and things like that to hunt these sorts of things, right? But I couldn't believe it. I said, I've never heard of one in this lake, right? And I'd been fishing it for years already at the time and stuff like this. I went around every single place. Not one single person had ever heard of an Arctic char ever being gotten in there. They didn't, and they were totally astounded by this and that sort of thing. And then finally, one person, they had remembered that the Quebec government had tried to stock some ages ago, but nobody had even caught one. So they got eaten up very quickly because even though it was cold, the Tropics or lake, it's still, our region is so warm that still it's not enough, right? And they don't do well in these sort of, this is as far as they can go, right? But the thing is that they got trapped in these sort of lakes like this, and all kinds of sort of things. And yes, these lake monsters, which you'll be reading soon about in these several books here, but the first one's all just about lake monsters, pond water monsters, stream monsters, a lot of monsters that are not covered, and tons of giant local fish stories. So if you're an angler of any sort, you will absolutely find this extremely useful also for lots of great places to fish. Right? So I covered, this is the only book of its kind in the sort of planet that was done by a one of a kind sort of individuals, right? That's sort of done this. So the person that's putting this together, he's sort of a person that's also interested in cryptozoology, and mostly it's interviews with myself, but also with Dar and a couple others, sort of individuals and things like that, and different stories. So it's sort of, but mostly the main sort of contributions is mostly sort of my angling hours across all these hundreds of lakes with lake monsters in them, and sort of a different perspective on it, very different than the rest would have. And yes, there is lake monsters. And that by the end of the, you'll see through the book now, even the most skeptical human beings, that at the end that there is some categoric, pretty well proof that yes, we have had in the past sort of animals that are sort of traversing into our lakes, that do visit our lakes or live in them all the time, that are unknown to science. There is some, not as many as one would think. Many of them are responsible of other sorts of creatures, but they're also still interesting and mysterious. So I cover every sort of thing from the Joe Nichols like sort of stuff here with the logs and stuff. I've seen thousands and thousands of logs come up out of the water in the Ottawa River and all kinds of different sort of bodies of water. We're going to cover all the skeptic stuff of ducks to everything else, and show when they're valid, when they're not, and that it's not as simple as that. There's way more to this phenomena than you could ever possibly imagine, including bizarre explanations that'll blow your mind in some of the lakes. Everything from sharks to, yes, even octopus. Right? So there's a lot of sort of stuff out there, and I have historic, including even films that I'll reference that you can go look at, that were not CGI'd. Some of them are quite old, and sort of stuff like this, and ancient historic records from newspaper articles and archives all over the place, that you'll be astounded by the sort of uniqueness of this sort of book, about how it's sort of different compared to the normal sort of lake monster sort of book that you would ever sort of see. And I'm extremely going to wipe out a lot of them that have famous, that they're supposed to have a monster in them. I'm going to tell you exactly what they are, and sort of, and we're going to get rid of a lot of so-called lake monster lakes that really have no lake monster in them at all. They still do have interesting phenomena, some of them, but the actual least explanation that is valid is the waves most of the time. This is not the case in a vast majority of them. So skeptics that use this are just being silly and really don't have very little experience in the water, and are quite cover all this sort of stuff, and also a lot of interesting sort of ones that you've never heard of, from early sort of sea carcasses to all kinds of different things, and a lot of bizarre stuff that is, yeah, you know what I mean, and giant snakes throughout the lakes, and alligators and all kinds of weird stuff that shouldn't be there, and a lot of bizarre sort of things. Some of them are just mentions. A lot of them also will be extinct likely cryptids, where they were around in early times but never to be seemingly seen again, and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to cover a huge amount of these sort of things, and in the second book we cover all kinds of bizarre little known cryptid cats as well, and all that sort of thing too, and everything from avian sort of killers, giant eagles attacking people, you name it. It's going to cover a lot of weird sort of stuff like that, but I cover, if you're from the sort of Ontario region and stuff like that, the Canadian section, nobody has more familiarity with the Ottawa River monster than myself. I've been investigating and studying and seeing some weird stuff in the Ottawa River and hooking into things in the Ottawa River since the 60s, and have tabulated all kinds of interesting stories of witnesses and people seeing some bizarre stuff, including a fair amount of bizarre sightings that I had. I have not had any bizarre sighting in there in many years. The river's getting much more cleaned out by the second. These zebra mussels and other problems that we're sort of having, and a lot of different other issues. But at one time, and still these things do visit occasionally, but at one time there definitely was a lot more strange sort of creatures floating around in there, and may still be. But I mean, you have to sort of, I mean, it's different now. There's a lot more boats on the water 24 hours a day and all kinds of stuff like that, that may be not sort of indicative for monsters to be popping up their heads too often. But anyways, if you're interested in sort of the especially Ontario, Quebec region, you'll get all kinds of lakes you've never heard of, that's never been mentioned in any lake monster books, and all these kinds of stuff. A lot of them are, of course, everything from the from Magog. I interviewed a lady that saw the Magog sort of monster, a giant eel she saw, and sort of stuff like that, and all kinds of different ones that I cover, of the more common ones as well. But also, it's loaded full of history, because I'm an historian. I go back and show records of early sort of accounts through newspapers as well, and a whole bunch of different stuff like that. So he's putting it all together there, just adding the last little bits to it, and then let him do his stuff, and we'll take it from there. But we already have the cover for it. Looks pretty nice, and that sort of thing. So stay tuned for that. And then that other one that was supposed to be out a long time ago, he's going to work on that next. But it's sort of because of the sort of this person, this editor, sort of passing on in different problems, it sort of just wasn't the right time to do that. So, anyways, we'll just, it was put on the shelf for a minute. But anyways, we'll get these things around eventually and stuff like that. But meanwhile, I like doing these sort of just to educate people on some different things out there, and sort of keep our minds off of this corona planet and sort of stuff like that. But yeah, here is a, for instance, here's some more cryptid cats across North America and the world, killer attacking cats. Now, all kinds of people have vanished, and children, young, small, stuff like this, where likely it might have been like a mountain lion or a black panther or things like this, and these sort of things like this. You know, and there's a lot of these as well, because of also people releasing them, especially back in the 1960s and stuff. They started, yeah, you know, making it more difficult to have a pet in some areas and different things like that. So a lot of people couldn't hold them. A lot of people had exotic zoos, and the zoo didn't make any money, and the animals just strayed out. and this sort of stuff, because a lot of these sightings started getting more prevalent around that sort of time, but they existed way before that for hundreds of years, of all kinds of extraordinarily sized ones that seem to be bigger than sort of your typical kind, as well a lot of them with vampire like sort of stuff where they kept finding, the cattle killed. There was one case there where this killer sort of lion like thing was going around in Ohio someplace there, and this giant lion monster was actually, each time he would attack a cow, he would eat a quarter of the cow. I can't possibly see that could be, you know what I mean, a panther or something. It seems a bit on the heavy side of what they would be normally eating for one to gouge that much off of it, like a quarter of a cow to a half a cow sort of thing in a sitting. It sounds pretty wild, right, and stuff. But here, like this one on right, young Miller was attacked by a great cat beast. He got attacked in the Arlington County, and a police officer saw the beast, saying it was as large as larger than the size of a big police dog sort of thing. And here's the guy; you can see all the scars on him and stuff like that. It was also suspected that this creature had killed a bunch of cats and possums and things like that. And all of a sudden, just, as usual, these things come and go, right? You'll get these sightings for a while, and then all of a sudden, then the creature sort of vanishes, right? And or sometimes they'll kill something else or do something, and then all of a sudden the sightings will stop, right? So very interesting. But I mean, just another sort of thing out there where there has been a lot of cases sort of where they, mysterious livestock and different things like this in states where these eastern cougars aren't still supposed to exist, or especially black panthers and things, yet the killings are very panther-like. They find panther-like footprints and all this kinds of stuff. So how scientists keep denying that there's wild, large cats living in our forests is sort of a bit out there. I mean, the evidence is just... I couldn't count how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of newspaper accounts. We had them here all over the place, from Britannia there. There was this cougar that kept being seen by all kinds of people along our green belt, just right here out in the outskirts of Ottawa, right? And that sort of thing like that. So Black Panthers back in the 70s, it's in the second book. This Italian barber guy got attacked by 3 Black Panthers, and I actually went and investigated it. And not only was he probably telling the truth, I actually heard this thing, and we found its den. That's right. Well, I didn't see it, but we found its den, and we'll go about this where right in a major city, even a cat can hide amongst us, big cats. And I saw this with my own eyes, and this is way back then. So this way I have a kind of a much more open mind to these things, because there's sort of too many sort of people all seeing the same sort of stuff. And when you actually go out and investigate it and find some evidence sometimes for these things, well, that's why I've sort of been like this, and seeing some odd water anomalies, and possibly within about 50 yards of a Sasquatch, listening to him screaming and smashing through 10-foot sort of branches here, and mowing them down, and with the most terrifying howls I've ever heard in my entire life. I mean, this guy was pissed. That's right. And the stench of him and everything else, even though I didn't see him, but the other fellow got pushed or punched by it, by this guy. And this guy was tall. He was 6 foot something, and he said this dude was way taller than him, right? So at least like several plus feet taller than him. And he was sort of leaning over, and he sort of pushed him, right? So sort of thing like this. So I mean, this guy probably was like 9-10 feet tall, sort of idea, and that's why he was smashing through all these trees, right? And I mean, so even though I didn't see him, every indication in the planet proves to me that there was not some gimmick. There was This guy had sort of a black eye here. He had all stuff stuck in his coat. Like, I mean, this thing slammed him, but obviously took restraint because, like I said, I believe if a Bigfoot wanted to hurt you, he would in a second, right? So this thing, and he was peeing, and it could be that this pissed him off. Maybe he's peeing on his sort of territory or something. I have no idea why this creature decided to do this to him. But what freaks me out is that we were, having bonfires and drinking beers and all that kind of stuff, right? And making noise and doing things, right? This is the thing is that I highly suspect that when you guys are doing all these calling and all these wood knocking and this sort of stuff, yes, it may attract them, but we're not seeing them only if they want to be seen. And because that guy went alone off by himself into this sort of thing, I don't know if that guy was standing there or if he was watching us from someplace. Maybe we attracted him with the noise and all this sort of stuff. And then when he seen him going off into his thing, he went and did that. But lucky for him, he just decided to push her curiosity out of him, right? He could have just grabbed him like a lot of people sort of vanish here and that sort of thing like that. Also in the 1970s, I did see in front of my face some kind of Bigfootish, like small ape to baboon sort of creature of some sort. It was not a bear, guaranteed of this. It was not a badger. It's not a wolverine. It's not any of these sort of. I know exactly what these things look like, even way back then, way before that sighting. Right, I already knew all these creatures quite well, and I watched this thing. Even though it was in the grass, he was an ape of some sort. So he could have been a juvenile Sasquatch. Maybe already have seen a Sasquatch, but I don't know. But I do know it was some kind of ape of some sort, right? Sort of stuff like this. So the point is that there is animals that are hiding amongst us, and they are out there, and it is very possible that a lot of these vanishings that we've attributed to other things may be actually to do with these kinds of things, and certainly some of them seem to be, and so we'll cover some more here and stuff like this as we're going along. But here, this fascinating one. This was a bizarre early sort of a cryptid cat. This demon cat robbing was robbing these sort of graves in Shelbyville, Indiana, in the Patterson Cemetery east of Lewis. It digs into the graves and it would scatter bones all over the place, right? I mean, absolutely bizarre. But there's a depiction of it in the early newspaper. These two ladies seen this thing digging around and sort of stuff like this, right? But interestingly, there's actually even some films of a Bigfoot like sort of creature doing the same sort of stuff, and tales of a Bigfoot like creature doing this, as well as cat like creatures doing this. This is not a specific only one. Even the rodents attributed to doing this exact same behavior. So I find this interesting that it's strange that certain sort of creatures out there are known to do this behavior where they're actually looking up and digging up, they can smell so well possibly of some sort that they can sort of, even, and they realize that there's a lot of death there and bones and stuff, and they dig it up and use it as some kind of food source. It's terrifying, but I mean, this story is too weird to not have probably something to it, right? So I sort of I believe that some creature was there doing this, whatever it might have been, but they thought this was a depiction. They don't really describe it that well, but it seemed to be some kind of sort of, evil sort of black cat monster of some sort, right? Sort of idea, but just another sort of interesting one there. Another one I fully believe in is the Anidi tiger there, Tigre montana, right? The mountain sort of tiger, right? Mostly seen in the Chad region. And this it's a very interesting sort of a cryptid because a lot of people think it might be a relic saber-tooth tiger sort of thing, right? It has like great big sort of front sort of tusk-like teeth on it. It is said to live mostly in caves, the caves again. around the Anita Plateau, their area, said to be larger than a lion with huge front saber-tooth-like teeth, striped orange to blackish color. Also seen in the Chad Bungo Massif. One drug lord was thought to have been killed by one. They actually had this drug lord sort of was taken by, they thought, by some kind of monster or something, and they sort of way they described it might have been actually one of these. But there's a lot of mystery cats around the world that I'll cover in another sort of one like this, because I wanted to get more into the sort of Bigfoot one, but I just wanted to cover a few and that sort of thing. But because they all have a correlation here where people's animals are missing, their dogs or cats or stuff like that. Sadly, their children sometimes, and yes, sadly, adults, right? And this sort of thing. So you're going to see here a bunch where even Bigfoot was captured many times. This is just a very small list. There's a lot of researchers out there that aren't seemingly familiar with this sort of information, and I see all kinds of inaccurate sort of things like this claiming, why don't we have a body? We've had a body like massive amounts of times here, from the Mongols all the way to now. It's just in the more recent times, nobody has, except that a lot of people reported actually killing one, where police came and sort of took the creature away, or they put him in a mental hospital and caught him, or different things, but then you never hear about him again. And this could be a problem, is that there is some kind of cover up this way, that, you know what I mean, they don't exist no matter what. So unless the entire world was seeing it all on cameras, and everybody was standing there and they could all smell a Bigfoot's toot sort of idea and looking right at them, the world then otherwise just, that's what it is. It's a bear, it's a moose, it's Godzilla, it's your ancestor, it's anybody, but it's not a Sasquatch, right? Sort of thing like this. And it could be that even a long time ago, some of these that were brought in, they realized they were primitive humans, and they hushed this up because of this Darwinism stuff and all these other weird sort of stuff, because it's pretty hard to now pitch people that we evolved from a chimp man 25 million years ago, yet this chimp man standing right in front of you sort of thing, and he isn't any different than that, because all this stuff is gobbledygook. People change quite quickly, and you'll see this. I'll show you some examples where a guy just living in a cave for a short period of time becomes pretty wild, right? And all kinds of stuff like this. So it seems what's really occurred here is throughout our centuries that different groups of people might have been chucked out of villages, different things like that. Some people survived the flood, different sort of cataclysms where they started living a more primitive, hairy-like sort of life. And some of them just keep these sort of genes to them, and they live in caves and hide amongst us, and do come down and grab us sometimes and take us out of national forests and even in our backyards and stuff like that, where we happen to be near forested sort of areas, right? So we'll cover a lot more about this stuff as we go along. Other bizarre cryptid cats, the bizarre cactus cat. It was said to inhabit the American Southwest, described as cougar-like, with spines, would attack victims. It had armor like a tail and spikes, and it was said to slice cactus and drink of it getting drunk. Right? So, you know what? Like, I've not heard of any sort of modern sightings of this sort of thing like this, but I have the highest suspicion, even though some of them was said to have, more legs and this and that, and all kinds of weird sort of variants of this. This coming at night and slicing into cactus and drinks it almost sounds too weird to make up. It's like the rock sort of bird there, where there was his tail. I mentioned that on another one that was thought as myth, written hundreds of times in mythological sort of books. Oh, the fanciful, idiotic natives, they imagine birds that eat, granite walls and stuff. But it's all true. This bird actually does that. He smashes into granite walls until he can bust off a little pebble. He does seemingly eat it. That's what a native would think, or anybody else. But what really occurs is apparently he sucks on it for a while and then will spit it out eventually later. But it's some kind of nutrients that he needs inside of it for his body, or maybe for some mating thing. Who knows? Like whatever it would be, right? Maybe there's some kind of mineral or something in it that the creature needs for some kind of reason. But the same thing, I would suspect that it is feasible that this cat was supposedly lived a lot in the caves as well, that sort of stuff, and he would only come out at night, mostly usually seen, and he had these spiked tails and things like this. It could be that, I mean, because of low water and different things like that, that some kind of cat could have evolved where they might do some bizarre sort of behavior like that, where it's some kind of sort of fluid that they would need or something. I don't know. I even though there's a lot of mythology added to this one, I kind of suspect that there might have been some very little truth to this of some sort. So I don't know if this creature's still being seen, but he sounds fascinating. I like the idea of it. Anyways, this crazy cougar-like sort of creature that comes out at night and he drinks cactus liquid to get wasted. So it sounds pretty entertaining. But I mean, all kidding aside, though, it's just it's another one of these ones where when I get these tales, every time that they sound so insane that they cannot be, those are the ones that end up being real quite often. I mean, the more crazy, the better. There's one over in sort of Japan and China and stuff where there's this weird sort of dragon-like rooster monster, and they say that he has these sort of flames that comes out of him like a sort of a dragon like that, and the description is absolutely bizarre. He's almost never been seen in many decades, so it may be extinct, but the descriptions are identical all across this sort of Asian region. There's ancient sort of depictions of them in different areas where they always got them identical, and they say that he has some kind of ability to sort of shoot some kind of gas like stuff at you and weird sort of stuff, right? So it sounds another bizarre one where it's so weird that there probably is something sort of to this, right? Other sort of ones here, the bizarre wampus cat. Even those guys, what's their name? Those funny sort of redneck guys that make all those. Traps and stuff. They're monster hunters. These guys are quite the comical cast of characters, anyways. But I missed that show. It was very entertaining. They had some good, but they like hunting all the weird ones. They like myself, the more interesting sort of bizarre cryptids, right? But even they hunted this wampus cat. The cat was said to sometimes have 6 legs, and it's a water panther, described similar to a panther with odd extras. Sightings still exist, right? Like there's a lot of weird ones like that. There was these Maine sort of coon cats, and ones also reported around Michigan and different ones like this where they were thought to be a part raccoon and sort of part a cat, right? And these sort of things. And there's been all kinds of these. There's cabots. There's actually there's here in our region. There's been people that have mated them before, where they're a rabbit and a cat, and a lot of people think they're mythological, but no, that's actually they're real. It's there's a way of doing this. And so the idea is that it's possible that some of these strange creatures out there could be sort of combinations of things that we don't think could actually mate, but maybe can. This might have even been the Griffith or some of these other weird ones in ancient times. It could have been a mixture of some other bizarre sort of creature where they mated, and maybe that's why you wouldn't see them too often, but because they had this peculiar behavior, once a blue moon this would occur, right? And that sort of things like that. Like besides all these sort of cats, especially the cougar to black panther variety continue yearly, and now anybody doubts their existence, they're just ignoring thousands of accounts. I mean, just looking through some old sort of stuff here, I run across hundreds of these that I could have listed in here, of people seeing them. I've interviewed people from Cantley, from Britannia, Gatineau Hills, in Gatineau, Labaronde Park, all kinds of different ones like that where they've claimed that they've seen either black panthers or cougars or both, sort of thing like that. And they've been consistently seen since ever they were supposedly these eastern cougars have been extinct, and in every sort of province that they're not supposed to be in, and in every state as well. I mean, this is a silly thing for somebody to say that. When the guy said, did he have binoculars and a magnifying glass that he could cover every inch of terrain around where the eastern cougar lived and looked all with his field glass and didn't see them? No. Yeah, so he just didn't see any in his areas, and other scientists didn't see any for a while. They couldn't find any on their tracking sort of stuff like this. So they just pronounced them extinct for something to do and write a paper. But the reality is from that day on, people have been still continually seeing them, and even scientists have found their hairs sort of embedded into posts here in Quebec and all kinds of stuff, right? So, I mean, how people deny that, that is absolutely bizarre to me, because they never have went extinct. You're making a mystery out of nothing because you believe some guy in an office that just made a declaration about something with really no backing to it. Same with Thylacine or any of them. All these guys just, this is gobbledygook. I mean, it doesn't prove the creature isn't there anymore. Just because you're not picking them up on your trail cams or anything is irrelevant. You might be hunting in the wrong spot. They may be extinct in that little area that they used to be common, or they might have moved. Creatures move from fires and all kinds of stuff. As for instance, let's say there's a great big burning fire in a mountain, and some, I don't know, rare sort of squirrel lives in the valley in between these two mountains, and the only way he can escape is running through some tunnel underneath the mountain, and that leads him to a new valley. Now he's in another state, and but there's enough foods there and nuts for him to eat, so now he starts living there. You see what I mean? Like I mean, this is very sort of, you don't know how creatures could sort of, so just because you get seeing them there anymore, they could be gone down the street and now you're looking in the wrong areas, right? And nobody's looking for them there because they're not known to live there. And this would continue on, right? They could keep spreading, and just small numbers, and they a little bit sneak into the next state and the next state, and you go on and on and on, right? They're still being seen. They've learned to evade us, more and more so probably modern creatures, because they've had more run-ins with us. They're learning even better to sort of evade and sort of thing like that. Plus, people are not out in the wilderness as much as they think they are. Yeah, we got good equipment, all that sort of stuff, and yeah, 5 million people go hiking, but they're really, really going on just normal little pathways here. They're not actually wilderness people like Les Strauss here, where you're dropping them off way out in the middle of jungle wungo land, right? Like, I went one time to this way up in Quebec, and you had to go in by a float plane, right? And this is absolutely astonishing. There was literally hundreds and hundreds of lakes that we've seen flying over these mountainous regions, giant packs of wolves to bears to all kinds of creatures and stuff like this. And this is just floating around, but you only see them because they never even see humans or anything like that. There's no roads for gazillions of miles around anywhere, sort of thing like that. And we have no idea, like, I mean, what's really out there, because there is no scientist guy going out there. He thinks he's going out there, but he really isn't. Like, there's literally tens of zillions of caves in our North American market where these creatures have been probably hiding amongst us for, since time began, sort of idea. And they are able to hide in these sort of things and evade us. And so we're just sort of ignoring sort of our historical sort of stuff. We're ignoring the fact that Bigfoot to sort of monsters and stuff have all been caught in the past many times, not in recent years, some of them. But the thing is they were in the past. And so if you would even accept one of these, then there is no more mystery. Yes, these creatures exist, right? Sort of thing like that. But this is the thing is that a lot of our sort of vanishings, I would suspect there are different things going on here. There's feral wild people that are rapists, psychos. There's sick people that are going out in our forests in groups, even, I wouldn't be surprised, that wait for people and sort of do this as well. We're going to cover a whole bunch of that sort of stuff. But to deny that sort of these things exist seems a bit out there to me, because you're basically denying tens of thousands of, I mean, it's endless here of this sort of stuff. Just with the small amount I cover here is crazy, right? It's a lot of sort of interesting things here where you're seeing the same descriptions across all kinds of newspapers and things where these people could never have known of each other. Many of these are really early, where they're before sort of they're using all these sort of things where the papers were shooting across so everybody could pick it up on the news press or stuff like this. A lot of these were local and only read in those sort of areas, right? So this sort of thing like that, yet they always get them the same, right? So, yeah, a lot of things to think about here. But anyways, definitely there is some interesting things about cats in our North American market, where there is loose pets that are running around. There's that one thing, but also I suspect that there always has been sort of like the eastern cougars never went really fully extinct. Cougars are in our sort of every sort of state, whether people like it or not, but they're just in low numbers in most places and things like that. But they certainly exist. To deny that, I find absolutely bizarre, because I mean, seriously, the newspaper historical accounts from then till today is just astonishing, and every person's telling you the same thing, and the only reason you're denying it is because some scientists claim that they went extinct. Why does people have so much faith in a guy in an office? It mind boggles me. But anyway, you're like mystery vanishings. For thousands of years, people reported their children, women, and sometimes men vanishing from their villages to out in the woods. All warn you to stay out of the woods at night or out of the caves. Most think due to silly fantasy writers, these stories were made to scare children. The fact is, this is not the case in many of the cases, right? Just like early poets made dragons sound imaginary, yet they based these tales because dragons' eyes were said to glow in the caves. So they had made romance after this real sort of creature. That's what they're basing the stories on. And they gave him a romantic twist, saying that he was the gardener, keeper of treasures, right? And this sort of thing like that. But most people are taught backwards that, these fancy writers started making this sort of stuff up. No, they based these on original sort of stories of what dragons would do, right? And they fully admitted that dragons existed. These guys who were making these fanciful things at the time, because that's where they got the stories from, right? Sort of stuff like this. But a lot of people don't understand this too. The same thing, you've been pitched with all this garbage sort of fairy tale like sort of stuff, which is all based on real things originally. Ogres, trolls, all of these are all actually Bigfoot. They're wild people. That's what they are. Every single time, if you actually look at their origins and read the real descriptions of early tales of people, the children vanishing in the caves, there's short ones, big ones, and stuff like this, but a lot of them were furry. A lot of them were ugly as hell. And they all lived in the caves every time. And there's real proof of these, like I said, from the Lovelock Cave, one there in Nevada, and stuff like this. And we're going to cover some mysterious disappearances right around there that 100% correlate with this, because this one group, do you think that was the only race of giants only living in one cave that happened to be 10, 11-foot red-haired giants? and that would run down and rape the women and eat the children and eat the kids and this sort of thing, right? No, it's impossible. Even though we have them in a museum now in Arizona, the thing is there have to be others, right? And they match 1,000,000% the Sasquatch sort of phenomena. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, like I said, Sasquatch actually exists. If you want to look by, here's what you're saying. You're denying the facts. I mean, it's a very factual thing. A native group has told you that a giant red-haired hairy man lived up in a cave, and they come down and they would rape them and eat them. They found this cave, they found the giants, they found where they would actually eat you and grind you up, right? And so every single word that they said is true. And they describe it identical to every other sort of group of natives around, saying that these giants live in the caves. So we already found one in the Lovelock one. You found all kinds of cave giants in the past the Smithsonian threw away that you're presuming are millions of years old. They're probably only hundreds or thousands of years old. And they were remnants of just a group that was living there where you happen to find some of their bones. But there's still live ones and they're running around in our forest. This sort of thing. I mean, this is the truth. And you'll see this. There's been a whole bunch that was even captured, even not that massively long ago, of wild sort of people where they fit 100% this sort of phenomena, right? So besides the Gigantopithecus thing, that's a side issue, but it's all the same. They all live in the forest, the caves. This is where any sort of hunting like sort of creature is going to hide up in a cave. He's going to come out at night and he's going to be able to raid your orchards or do different sort of things without your knowledge, right? I mean, it's very believable, actually. It's not hard to believe at all. There's been, like, even wild people's pets where the creature vanished for years and still was able to survive out in the woods around it and things like that. Dogs that have went wild, junkyard dogs, all kinds of stuff, things like that, right? So I mean, this is not sort of as unbelievable as you think. And a lot of humans are wild and crazy, and it doesn't take them long once they start living in cave-like environments within so many cycles here. Even their children thereafter might be quite cave-like, and they might start producing fur a lot more and becoming more stronger because you're eating natural berries, wild raw meat, and all kinds of weird stuff. I think that makes you more sort of machismo over time, probably, right? Sort of stuff like this. But I mean, the bottom line is that how people deny that there's no evidence for these is absolutely bizarre. I mean, you're knocking literally thousands of historical records only because you didn't see one and you really haven't been out in the forest. I mean, and you're accepting a scientist who, even if 10,000 scientists went out every year out in the wilderness and walked around, they would never be able to cover everything, not even remotely. So, I mean, you're just listening to people that's their sort of thing because they live in a sort of fantasy world where they must know everything because they're reading the guy's papers before it. Oh no, he already covered that area. He would have seen it. So they sort of all have too much faith in each other and sort of thing like that and sort of ignore the facts, and they're not aware of all this historic sort of information about 5 million newspaper articles and everything else, all identically matching each other. If they were made up, you couldn't get this. It's impossible. The Bigfoot guy in one town would have 3 horns growing out of his bum. Another one would have, glowing eyes that shot flames from hell. Another one would do this and that. You don't get these variants. You only get some with longer claws, and some that sort of thing like that, more werewolfish, but that's about it, sort of, which could be easily explained by just like any other humans. Occasionally we get sort of ones that are malformed or different things like that, and they may be crazy and stuff like that, but they may be still swift and know to hide from you, right? As I showed you in my other show there, I show you the wild man in Morocco. I mean, you couldn't beat a more Bigfoot guy in the universe. And then, I mean, the guy had a coned head. arms way longer than any human being on the planet, leg proportions, all that sort of stuff. Extremely Bigfootish. Big wide bottom, his mouth is more sunk down, his neck is more into his sort of shoulders, the whole sort of thing. And here's a guy that we had around just decades ago, right? And this sort of stuff like this. So we already have these evidence that a Bigfootish like sort of guys are out there. So yes, there is people that are walking in our forests that may be being kidnapped by these wild humans that want to either mate with you, they want to eat you, or hold you captive out of curiosity. All three things seem to occur, right? And children sometimes are even protected by them, or sort of weird things like that. We'll even cover that. So, I mean, again, people got to start seeing the truth. I mean, there's no way. Now, sadly, the problem is that three-quarters of people who are involved in the Sasquatch world are just doing it to get themselves a YouTube video. They're doing it because they like to play pranks and jokes. They're doing it to make a few dollars. Like there's this one guy I see, he has these werewolf shows. He has every week, it's the same guy's voice, but with about 40 new tales every second. I mean, I rarely ever get it. Even when I was researching all over the place like this, it's hard to get people to give you that many sort of tales like this unless you were paying them or some kind of thing like that. So it's hard to believe that there's 10 zillion of these werewolf tales every day of the week. This guy has read off more werewolf sightings, like literally in the several years that he's had this show. He must have by now said about 3,000 sort of werewolf reports, all within a sort of all around his region, even. I mean, so like, seriously, it's not possible that there's that many sort of sightings, right? Sort of thing. So there's a lot of people that seemingly are adding stuff to this and all kinds of weird stuff. The wood knocking and all these kinds of weird things that are out there that are sort of making it not a really sort of where serious people can actually look at it and start getting to the truth, because there's too many sort of other stuff being mixed in with it. You know, we're squatching, we're this and that. I mean, all this stuff is silly. It's just like, I'm a serious person. I want to get to the truth, and I'm telling you, there's wild humans for sure, guaranteed, that live in our cave systems. That I can guarantee you. Also, in the highest probability, a few great apes of some sort. But the point is, like, especially in Florida there, and ones like that, the Ohio grassman, these different ones are more sort of wild apish, like orangutanish sort of things. But many of them are really wild human beings that are just happen to be more airy, sort of thing, and some of them are actually grabbing us, sadly, right? So, but anyways, you know, like a mystery vanishes here. Like, are we being hunted in our national forest? Here, poor Julie going for an evening walk in the wooded path at a hunting camp, little realizing soon she will be the hunted, right? You can see old creepy here in the back, from insane feral people of the hairy and non-hairy sort, waiting for us to visit one of our national forests, right? So this is the thing, is that besides the Bigfoot sort of gang and things like that, there's also, I highly suspect, groups of sort of individuals that also are waiting in our woods for this sort of stuff, because they know the odds of them getting themselves caught is pretty slim, right? So sort of stuff like this. So there seems to be more than sort of one thing here going on at once. It's not just one. Like, as a, for instance, there was this terrible case around 1895, I think it was 1896, or something like this. This girl, she was walking, skipping along down the road and stuff like this, and these three black men, actually, back then, I mean, that was really sort of wild, risky that they did that. I mean, because you know, they weren't as nice to the poor black man back in the day, right? And that sort of stuff. So this was even more unheard of, that anybody would do such a thing. But these three black guys, they did some terrorizing things to this girl, just dragged her right off as she was going along this sort of pathway. She vanished, nobody could find her. So they got these trackers and all this kind of stuff, and they kept hunting down and finally found these sort of black guys, and they lynched them, right, and sort of got a sort of confession out of them, sort of. But I mean, what they did to this girl was just sort of wild like that. But so there's also wild humans that maybe even in groups and stuff that are also responsible for some of these sort of things. But it's absolutely terrible. But it's not only national forests. The stories that I've collected over the ages didn't have much to do with that. Sometimes they were national forests, but mostly to do with sort of where in campgrounds and weird sort of ones like that, and mysterious vanishings of people swimming in small lakes where they've dredged it and everything, yet there's nobody there anymore. And sometimes some kind of monster-like thing was seen around them just before they vanished, or stuff like a giant snake or different weird stuff, right? So there's other sort of creepy things out there besides that, but we'll just cover some different ones here, right? Sort of thing. As I covered in many Bigfoot shows, that people to animals have been recorded for thousands of years in many countries. All the same old MO sort of thing, right? Like they all live in deep woods or forests. Giant to smaller varieties exist, ape-like to more human-like. There's literally tons of old stories, from cattle mutilation to children missing, reporting of a giant or smaller hairy swords, or many have clubs or other weapons. So let us cover the more humankind and some of the more hairy ones here. We'll cover some of them, but here's mean old Mr. Werewolf there grabbing one of our sort of poor sort of victims here. But there was many deaths attributed to that sort of beast as well, all the way from the beast of Jobadan, of course, to Quebec City, Montreal, and many other places in Paris. In fact, in Paris, there was, I got an old tale about these police, and the whole sort of, they had these sort of wolf police back in the day, and they had never used them for actually massive ages because the wolves were all supposed to be extinct by that point. But there was this terrifying werewolf creature that kept sort of howling at night, that they said they never heard anything like it, but they presumed it was some kind of giant wolf monster of some sort. So cattle was vanishing and all kinds of stuff like this, right? So they got these guys all together and they started hunting in packs for him and stuff like that, and they were never able to find the guy. But I mean, this is even like in France and stuff like that. So it's occurred all over, these sort of things where mysteriously people's cattle start missing and all kinds of weird things like this. But now get a load of this. This is the most fascinating case near I have ever seen of a wild person, and I absolutely love this one next because this is very interesting. Just listen to the story and you'll find it absolutely fascinating. Okay. Like feral humans also could be responsible for killings and vanishings of humans to pets. Here is a few early interesting cases showing that you do not have to be a tracker to survive in the woods, and that nuts may be hanging out in our national forests or our backyards. Here is, for instance, the most interesting wild man of a possible humans gone wild for killing livestock to people. One early paper mentions of a giant cave woman that shunned men. This lady had been cheated by her lover and retreated to the wilderness, right? Okay, so here's a depiction of her. She was this giant monster, right? Okay, a Lorenzo Collar, okay, he was this local farmer and he had his pigs, and sheep kept being missing. He lived in Marshall, Minnesota. He decided to contact the sheriff and tell him he had found this cavern near a spring on his property. While watering his cattle, he saw an enormous statured woman who was scantily clad, and had wild hair waving in her face like a veil. She darted back into the cavern, and he went into the entrance. The cave had amazingly neat piled bones and books a fancy bed on it and a violin, and she would actually play music in there. So can you imagine? So this wild woman got shunned by her lover, shunned off men, and actually went miles carrying her furniture and made herself a wonderful sort of home inside this sort of cave, right? And she was the one going out and stealing these cattle, but she actually was able to kill them, and she was neatly piling up the bones and sort of, I mean, that is fascinating because she was trained like a fancy sort of person, right? So even though she's living like a cave girl, she's also, doing the cave girl like sort of stuff here, ooh, 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 and going out and ferociously killing cattle and stuff. But at the same time, she's now piling them and has dishes in there and fancy stuff and playing a violin, right? So absolutely. I mean, how can you sort of beat that? That's extremely interesting, right? Sadly for him, he was leaving the cave and the giant woman entered it. She grabbed him and threw him out and dragged him down to a stream, yelling unknown words. She let him go and left. He was scared and went back and reported it to the sheriff. She ended up to be real, and her name was Mena Lorson, a well-to-do Norwegian giantess who, again, like I said, was spurned by her lover and who vowed off men. So can you imagine, eh? Like, so she actually carted this sort of stuff out there. And so, can you imagine? Like, she actually carried this, all of her furniture and all these wild sort of stuff, and just moved into this cave, right? But she was perfectly able to survive in this sort of thing. And this is the point is that here you even have a highly cultured woman. So for somebody to claim that, yeah, you know what I mean, it's feasible if you had the right sort of stuff, right? That you might be able to sort of survive better than you think you might, right? So mystery vanishings here, like even though I love Yogi and Boo Boo, and I even wrestled a bear and fed one, yeah, this is something you should not be doing, by the way, right? Bears for sure responsible for some missing people in our forests, right? And here's this early caption where there was this Yellowstone banded Yogi Bear, and he actually was doing this. He was going around his copping everybody's picnic baskets and stuff like this, right? And here this guy wants to wrestle with the bear, just like I did, right? But I mean, I love these early sort of newspaper accounts are fantastic. But I'll tell you a fascinating story. Many years ago, I saw a giant bear with several sort of people that, I mean, this dude was huge. I'm not even sure what he was. I mean, because this was fascinating. We were near this sort of army base way out in Gatineau, right? And these people were moving and they wanted to stop at this place and get some sort of, and some kind of poulet sort of poutine like sort of joint, right? And there was this little park across, and they just wanted to sit there and eat like a quick sort of this Kentucky Fried Chicken like sort of stuff where they gave you these little boxes and you could eat it outside. So we're all sort of around there, and I mean, this is completely urban area as you could humanly get. And so the lady decided that one of the beds or something was something wrong with it, and it was loose. The ropes that was all holding the back of the sort of the furniture and stuff. She wanted to sort of retighten it and do this and that. So we had to move a couple of things out of there. And as we were walking along this bush, this gigantic bear's head just came right out and he stared right at us, and it looked like he was going to try and nail one of us like this. But then the lady screamed and everybody sort of went like this, like this, and the thing sort of decided to back his head out and he vanished, man. But this is like right in the sort of major sort of normal place here. Like, I mean, so, and this bear's head was just absolutely atrocious. He was like the big monster that I wrestled with at this sort of a sportsman show that we had, right? So, sort of thing like this. And this guy, of course, was a pet. He was a Kodiak Alaskan brown bear of some sort, like a grizzly, aka grizzly like bear, right? And he was on one of those shows, or I forget if it was Grizzly Adams or one of those. And this guy was promoting him and stuff like this. I ended up being the first one to actually do this, right? But the thing is that, I mean, compared to even that bear, for a black or our small bears around here, I had never seen one with such a gigantic head. And I mean, his ears and everything. And he stuck his head right through this bush. But the thing is that could you see how easily maybe creatures like this, even bears do this besides a Bigfoot like thing, maybe they do weird stuff like that we're not aware of as much, and they can sort of hide as well if they choose to do so. Like, but usually bears are more sort of aggressive, a lot of them, but some are timid. And it could be that some use different sort of hunting methodologies that would sort of surprise you, right? But I'll never forget that, because I mean, this was right in the city, man. Like, I mean, yeah, there's a forest right nearby, but I mean, wow, right? So, I mean, as anybody else, like maybe in this Gatineau region in the past, maybe people have been missing around there, like, because I don't keep up with their news and that sort of thing. But I mean, it could be that's because, I mean, this thing seemed to want to sort of come out at us, right? And I mean, he was waiting there, like as if he was waiting for you. So, but very interesting. Anyways, I'll never forget him, but I'm glad he ducked his head back in and went away wherever he went. We were going to run through the bush and try and find out. All right. So, another interesting, and I had another run-in one with one in way up in a fly-in trip way up past this, way up in Quebec. What the hell's the name of the Goyne Reservoir, pass up that region, sort of thing. And I was actually held captive sort of for quite some time in an outhouse. I opened up the door and this great big bear was staring right at me, and I slammed the door, locked it, and I kept inside, right? Because this is a wild one. He's not a sort of somebody sort of brought in sort of bed here where the guy's a little bit, even them, you got to be careful, because I mean, they have turned on people and stuff like that in the past. But I love animals and I wanted to do it, so I did it, right? I garnered up enough sort of nerve to try and do this, and I was hoping the best. This bear actually put its mouth around my whole neck, no problem, and was just kind of almost like giving you a kiss or something. Like it was, it was gross, but I mean, it was cool, but it was terrifying because my neck was right inside the jaws of a bear, and I mean, all it had to do was squeezed down and it would have been the enemy, right? But I mean, he was a nice bear, right? Sort of thing, right? But I mean, nevertheless, I mean, this case was a wild one here, and he seemingly was doing a sort of like a pouncing like sort of behavior here. So it could be that sometimes people are walking by pathways and these bears and other creatures have learned that this is ones we use, and they wait silently and wait for a victim to come by that looks like they could target them, right? Here, like mystery vanishings, just like the former great American Idol talents there. Poor Cece here. I never heard of her in ages there, but but here she is. So this happens all the time here, where these sort of like. Sadly, a lot of these sort of people that were famous for 1 minute, then you never hear of them again and stuff like that. So hopefully she's doing okay. She was a great singer and very entertaining sort of a young lady there. But nevertheless, the thing is that in her forests and stuff like this, Bigfoot, bear, all kinds of weird stuff out there could be responsible for some of these sort of things, right? Like weird Girl Scout ones. Like there was this one case there about this Girl Scout. These Girl Scouts kept hearing this sort of rambling around this sort of bush, and they heard this growling and things like that, and the girls were all sort of all in their tents, and sort of, and they had finally, this growling had stopped and stuff like this, and the camp leader went away, and everybody sort of figured whatever it was gone. And this one girl had to really go for the bathroom again, right? And this has happened numerous times. She went out of the tent. I mean, there's nowhere to go. What kind of normal girl's going to keep walking into a dense forest when you're right in an open clearing and there's an outhouse 5 feet from you? You're going to go to the outhouse. I mean, she had a flashlight and everything, never to be seen again, right? And the same thing, they found sort of marks in the ground, like as if something heavy, right? Like that took her away. And I mean, usually bears or other things are going to start scrapping with you, and they can't sort of just grab you easily, like sort of thing like that. But there was a case, though, where this guy actually saved this young girl, and get a load of this bear had done this in the past and didn't kill the child either, but there was several children that had been grabbed in the back in the 1800s, and this posse started. This next girl had sort of vanished, right? And this posse sort of got around, and this one fellow that was a father of the girl that was missing, he kept tracking, and he finally was able to sort of catch up to what was taking his daughter, and it was actually a giant bear. But now get a load of this, the bear didn't kill her. He had her right in his mouth, and sort of like what the bear did with me, and sort of just was carrying her. And he had did this with the other sort of girl and just dropped her off in a spot and never actually harmed her. Well, this guy wasn't taking this chance, and he actually was a dead shot sort of guy, and he was able to kill the bear in one sort of shot, and took a shot like this and saved the girl's life, right? But at the same token, it might have been that he might not wasn't going to kill her anyways, because like what he had did with the other one. The other girl was found after, and she said that some big creature had grabbed her and sort of dragged her up and carried her and then dropped her near a log, right? So fascinating tale, but that sort of thing like that. But I mean, other ones there, that Girl Scout one, the same thing. They had also smelt when the girl was vanishing, that had vanished, and she didn't come back. The girl had went and got the sort of the camp lady, and they all went looking around, and they could smell some horrible stench like a skunk, right? So it sounds very Bigfootish in that particular one like that. But I mean, just another sort of bizarre one out there. But here, like the wild man of Florida and New York, this is one more Sasquatch like doing raids at night in the 1800s. The creature was heard by many with unearthly screams, but a few got a good look at it, except a black man who ran across it near a cave entrance. Again, the cave. He described this beast as standing upright at 7 to 8 feet tall and screamed at him, and he fainted. When he woke up, the beast was gone. Searchers found around the cave entrails of many animals had been attributed to the demise of the creature. No more mention if they ever got him or whatever, right? But here's what he was doing, these sort of raids here, right? This wild man, and very similar like this sort of thing, right? Constantly the same sort of stuff, but. I doubt in those times, right? The poor black man again, right? I mean, they were pretty vicious back in those days. These owners and slavery and all this sort of stuff like this. So I don't believe that this guy's going to make that up. Because he's going to be petrified that if he's lying, saying that he saw this giant 8-foot hairy monster man, right? If you were making that up, mean old master here is going to start giving you the beating and all that sort of stuff. Or you sort of mean like, so I sort of highly, in the highest probability, and considering they even found at the cave entrails and everything else, right, it's highly likely this guy was telling the truth here. So here's a very early sort of a Bigfoot account here. Here, although BC typical Bigfoot sightings, wild people also inhabit caves. We'll cover non-hairy types and hairy ones some more here. In BC, a giant wild hairy naked man, according to an early Montreal Gazette story in Harrison Mills, for weeks have been terrorizing natives of the area. One native coming back from, I love this story. Now get a load of this. This is why I believe a lot of them are humans. One native coming back from duck hunting, the hairy naked giant stole his ducks, except one of them, and he shoved the duck in his shirt and left. Okay? In ancient, you see this even with the orang pendek and different ones. The early guys mentioned that they used to have interactions with them when there was more of them, right? And they would actually do trade and stuff like this. So this native, I mean, seriously, that's too weird of a story to sort of be like. I mean, this is like really your 1800s here. You didn't have even gorillas around and all this sort of stuff barely, or any of these sort of things, right? So yet this native guy's telling you that this sort of, this giant airy monster man came down, steals his ducks, but then gives him back one and shoves it in his shirt. That's very sort of tribal humanish, like some kind of trade like system. So he wasn't being greedy. He said, okay, me Bigfoot, me got 5 ducks here to eat. This poor guy, I'll leave him one. Thanks for giving me some. Right? But I mean, this happened worldwide. You see these tales that they said in early times they would trade with them and stuff like this. And here's an actual sort of early account of that sort of a thing, right? Now get a load of this. This is a fascinating one here. I don't know where this photo comes from. The guy that posted it doesn't seem to know where it comes from. He just says gorilla going for a walk and he puts a question mark. So does anybody know where this comes from? Because A, gorillas usually don't walk like this. B, that is not a dude in a suit. That's right. C, look at the bend. It's very similar, like the Patterson sort of creature does, right? You see how it pushes off. It's different from what a sort of human would do. The knee is way bent at a different sort of angle and it pushes off at a sort of weird sort of twist and push up. Also, I didn't know in Africa it seems like there's almost like maple leaves or something there in the ground, some kind of leaves like that. It doesn't look very Africa-ish to me. I mean, that tree out in the front there almost looks to me like some kind of birch sort of tree of some sort, possibly. It's hard to tell. The picture's a bit grainy, but nevertheless, if I didn't know better, I would think this is more as some kind of Canadian sort of environment here, right? But I mean, it could be. Maybe there is sections in Africa that look like this that I haven't seen. I mean, the usual pictures I see of African sort of gorillas, they're usually in a different sort of forest looking than that, right? So if anybody has any explanation as to where this photograph came from and that, and it's very unusual because gorillas usually don't walk upright. And I mean, this guy looks fairly tall, and this is not a dude in a suit. I mean, you can see there's no neck at all, man. His head's built right into his shoulders, right? I mean, and look at the muscular sort of thing on it. I mean, wow. So like, I mean, I'm very fascinated by this picture because even if it is a gorilla, he's doing very strange behavior and his uh, where he's living seems a bit out there too. So, anyways, I don't know what to think about that one, but it's very sort of interesting. You must admit. Here, a wild man was reported to have been captured that likely was a Sasquatch, yet blamed on a man vanished 10 years earlier. Now, get a load of this. This is, you get this Joe Nichols sort of stuff here, even in way back ancient times, where people needed to have an explanation. So instead of the one that would be likely correct, they'll usually use anything that they can sort of find that must have, that's good enough, right? Let's write that down. Sounds good, sort of idea. And now get a load of this, okay? I love this case due to it really was a Sasquatch that was captured, okay? Now, here, Poughkeepsie, New York, a supposedly thought to be man, Arthur Breton, who had vanished 10 years earlier. Yet this seems to be a theory because when they captured him living in a cave in the Pauling Mountains, was brought in somehow. They don't explain how they actually got him. It mentions he barked like a fox, and when officers approached him, they mentioned they had issues capturing him, but they don't really say how they did that. But anyways, he had real long hair and a beard and was fully covered in brown fur. Okay, so his body's covered in brown fur, very Bigfootish, right? He had a very sharp, pointy teeth and scary-looking shaggy fur covering with thick, scaly eyebrows, scary eyebrows, right? He howled and growled, and then they threw him in a padded cell. The psychiatrist blamed the nun talking on him being alone. Okay? So now come on. I mean, seriously, this is only 10 years, okay? So the there is no explanation as to why they believe that this guy was this guy or anything, right? He doesn't sound like him at all. It doesn't sound logical to me that within 10 years, all of a sudden, when you had normal teeth before, now all of a sudden you got giant fang vampire teeth. All of a sudden you're completely covered with the most thick of some sort of hair here, and sort of the whole, and super strength and all this sort of stuff, right? I mean, but they actually put this guy in this psychiatric place, and he might have died there, as far as you know. Like, I mean, they don't mention any further what had happened, but they actually believed he was that sort of this guy Arthur Breton that had vanished 10 years earlier. But I suspect that this is just complete, oh, that must have been him. Remember that guy that disappeared? And they sort of, that was the only thing they could think of. So that was the answer. But I mean, it doesn't match sort of the description here at all. I mean, how do you get from a guy from 10 years? So that means that in 10 years you forgot how to speak? That's not feasible at all. I mean, come on. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, there's been people that were locked on islands for years and were found later, and they were talking like a normal human being and doing all the normal sort of stuff like that. Nobody's going to revert back to a chimp man in 5 minutes. You would have had to been sort of more born that way or passed on that way over time, like sort of thing like that, like some other methodology. You couldn't it couldn't have been a guy from 10 years previously sort of that changed that much. Now I suspect that, yeah, it wouldn't take long for the guy to maybe get more furry and matted and stuff like that, but not to such a degree like this, and now all of a sudden your teeth are all pointy. And I mean, come on, seriously, that's not really believable. In 10 years to change from a complete, now you're like a gigantopithecus, and before you were, a barber or something. I mean, come on. I mean, right? So I just suspect that, as usual, people didn't have answers for these things. So whatever sounded good, that could be, right, they would sort of relegate it to that sort of thing. But I mean, it seems like that wouldn't be the case at all. It's extremely hard to believe that that guy was the same guy, right? Because I just don't believe some human being could lose their complete talking abilities in that short of a period of time. I mean, there's been all kinds of cases with people with amnesia and all kinds of stuff that were found many moons later, and all of a sudden the guy wakes up and whatever and all that. I mean, they all talk normal. They didn't forget any of those sort of things, and their teeth didn't all of a sudden, just because they lived out in the woods for a week, change from regular normal size molars and everything else to giant fang monster teeth. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? So I just suspect that they believe that that must be the answer, because this guy had vanished before. He must be him. So could you imagine, we might have actually had a real wild man that could have been examined, that may be sitting in some cemetery someplace, right? And that sort of thing like this. Here's some more here. In 1725, a fellow called Peter the Wild Boy was captured and adopted. He was found wandering the forests of Germany on all fours, and was adopted as a pet by the king and queen of from King George I, and also the second courts. He was thought to be a werewolf. He had pointed face, growled, and had fangs. An early account of a wild man in Illinois, where I had my sighting of an ape of some sort back in the 70s. A wild man in Mount Sterling has evaded police and armed citizens. The wild man had did many robberies, stealing cattle and goats and taking them into an abandoned mine shaft near Mount Pleasant. Ambrose Smith had a battle with the man beast. He encountered the creature in the shaft, and he described it as a towering creature. His hands were covered with odd leather stretched skin over the bones. He got grabbed by the beast and tried to stab the beast. They wrestled for about an hour, well, probably 5 minutes, but yeah, you know how these sort of things go. But let's say, and somehow he escaped. They had been fighting on a slippery cave floor, and the creature sort of lost the grasp of him, and he was able to sort of slip himself out, according to him. And they put a $500 reward out for this sort of man beast, right? But I mean, the guy was sort of gigantic here, and sort of described as a towering creature, yeah, you know, completely covered with hair, and sort of another total Bigfoot sort of one, right? Here, Ashcroft, BC, a wild man was terrorizing natives. A reverend had reported in the Pemberton Meadows that natives were being attacked by a wild man in several areas around there, who wielded a knife attached to a pole said to cause great injury. Natives started arming and were going to shoot him if needed. The posse gangs went out after him, and he was never caught. Another early paper mentions a hairy 6-foot giant. These men hunting deer in a place called Hellhole. Where else, right? But it was dubbed the Hairy Devil by one of the men, Beck. Beck and a writer decided to go hunting further from camp and had a run-in with a hairy giant, and another one recently had been seen in the same area, according to the paper. Mentioned that in the article back in California as well. So at the same time around another sort of Bigfoot-like monster. So you actually got two reports in the same newspaper, right? William Karn, a former sort of newspaper man, had a bizarre account of this lady who had died for 24 years, and a suspected wild caveman sort of came to her grave, cleaning it all the time, and would put like fresh things on it and weird stuff like this. And this guy lived in a cave near Ena Park. Another bizarre account in early papers of New Jersey caveman around the village of Florida. Two men, Mr. Armstrong and Sullivan, had seen the beast near a cave in a field area. They thought he was a human and offered him bread. He screeched and shot back into the cave. A hunter saw him next near the cave and shot him. The creature howled and shot back into the cave. He found 8 inches long, like he shot this 8-inch long piece of hair right off of him, right? And here you can see the Zunaqua, the wild woman, as sort of the natives talk about and stuff like this. I had to laugh. I saw this documentary, and this guy says, for the first time ever in history, a native's going to share his account. I've talked to all kinds of natives that shared all kinds of accounts with me since I was a little kid. But besides all that, they've been telling these sort of stuff. There was all kinds of accounts in early newspapers where they interviewed natives. Probably about a quarter of the stories you can find are like that. But these silly shows, they try to sort of like, there's a lot of BSers in the Bigfoot world that sort of agitate me, like, and I mean, it just, I get mad because, I mean, I want the thing to be sort of as factual as you can sort of get here with real sort of historic sort of stories and things like that, and not these sort of things. But that's what they do, a lot of sort of stuff like that. And I mean, the reality is that natives don't typically like talking about with the outside world that much, think that they'll be ridiculed and these sort of things like that, but they are willing to talk with you if you sort of, you know, befriend them and stuff like that and show them you're serious. They will, and they have done so many times. So I mean, but this documentary was silly. The guy was going on, you know, trying to make it sound like this is the first time that the word Zunaqua was ever heard or any of this sort of stuff. But I mean, these things are all old news. There was all kinds of early newspaper reports from BC to all over the place, all mentioning these sorts of things with natives, you know, interviewing them and all kinds of stuff like that. So completely inaccurate. But anyway, just another sort of thing. But I mean, there's a lot of these, right? You know, another early account of a baboon-like creature being seen in Kentucky. Farmers coming back from the woods would return to town tales of the beast. It was suspected to be an escaped pet. They always, quite often, I noticed back in early times, they would sort of do the same thing. Just like in today, we sort of always give us any kind of explanation we can think of that sounds good, right? but maybe not really. Here's the case, right? Here's a super bizarre cryptid. I love this one, a castle monster. This got to be. I would love to go to this castle. Okay, so get a load of this in Carilla, Italy. A early newspaper account about these treasure hunters, and they were searching an abandoned castle and were terrified by a prehistoric beast said to look like a bull, except without horns, and he was 4 times the size of a bull. And the creature had went into this one guy and he fainted and stuff like this, right? So can you imagine that? You go to look for this treasure in this castle, there's this subterranean, dungeons down there and stuff, and this sort of creatures living down in there, sort of stuff like that. So I like the idea of it. Great stuff. But the Milan Exchange in 1882 mentions a hairy-legged wild man being seen by 2 hunters in Lancaster, Texas. Many reports, sort of, although Bigfoot experts do all kinds of documentaries, all having wrong info as to the earliest dates and reports. Most lists back to 1839, 1870. I see a lot of them say many 1950s. These are just by people that aren't really taking their time to research. Like I said, I found stories back from Europe from the 15th century and even earlier than that in other kinds of accounts, but paperish like sort of accounts here, right? And that sort of thing like that. But here's like, as for instance, a super early one, 1800, so way earlier than what a lot of these people claim. And this is just one of them. I cover many of them in the second book there that have never been seen. I've never heard of them in any sort of ones here. But this account showing that people are not researching well enough, and examples in journals to papers exist much earlier, sort of thing, right? But too many skeptics to so-called experts use wiki too much, I'm thinking, right? And not enough work. So there is plenty of examples of these sort of things, of them being caught and all kinds of stuff. And just people are not really taking their time out there to investigate properly, right? They just go out for 2 hours and all of a sudden they're an expert, right? But the Daily Advisor in November 1800 mentioned a capture of a wild man brought in on a ship from 400 miles from Cape Hope. It was reported to be of large stature and very strong, and he attacked an officer, right? And sort of stuff like that. So here's like 1800, exactly right on the nose, right? Of a Bigfootish sort of a guy here. Here are a few more accounts of wild men being captured. In 1907, a hairy 6-foot wild man was captured on Darden Island near St. Louis, Missouri. He was covered in hair and he weighed 210 pounds. He was terrorizing, and you'll find this on Vancouver Island and different small islands. There are stories like this. So not only do I suspect that Sasquatch probably came across the Bering Strait, that's very feasible, but he might have also swam across the Bering Strait, is very feasible as well. These Bigfoot, like a human, could probably swim, no problem, and there's tons of records of them being able to do this. And maybe this is a habit like any human that, they like exploring or some weird thing. And maybe for whatever reason, this creature maybe decided to go on this island for some bizarre reason, right? But nevertheless, he ended up being sort of on the island. And these people, sort of a posse-like thing or whatever, and they were able to actually capture him. A wild man was captured in Mexico in San Paulo area, captured by a miner. He was covered in fur. He was 6 feet tall, and he was being held in a town called Huasteca. Okay, and he would eat raw meat and vegetables and could not speak, right? So this is the thing that now, even though I'm all for the ladies here doing all these great things, going up, and you can see here the guys are passing out, and this is a great thing because here they're promoting modern woman sort of thing, right? Just but this newspaper article is well in excess of 100 years old, right? Sort of idea, sort of thing like this. So this feminism stuff was always around even back then. Yeah, you know, just sort of stuff, and that's great. I mean, that these ladies should be able to do all these sort of stuff, but it might be an idea that in these wilderness areas, considering there is giant hairy sort of Bigfoot dudes floating around and some other weird stuff that you know, not as much charming and less revealing clothing sort of stuff might be sort of useful for you, sort of a thing like that, because it is astonishing how many, especially women, and it would make sense. I mean, seriously, if you're dealing with a primitive human, I mean, why isn't he going to think, yeah, you know, Mrs. Nebraska's cute or whatever, right? This kind of idea, right? So, sort of stuff like that. So, but I like these early pictures here. I think that's great. You know, but the thing is that I just wanted to mention some things that I don't know that maybe people should sort of think about and stuff like this. That since so many people vanish in these things, like literally thousands and thousands of records, and these are just the one this Mr. Politis has found in the sort of these national forests. We're not mentioning the 10 zillion others that were down the street from national forests, which he hasn't gotten time to, that I've collected these weird sort of, but I collected them for different reasons, not for that sort of thing like that. But they correlate all perfectly with this sort of thing like this, where constantly wild men are either being captured or they were children missing and thought that it was a wild sort of man that took them, or all these kinds of stuff like this. This has been going on all this time. When people are going in national forests, considering that there's sort of could be groups of wild, sort of scary, feral people that are rapists, killers, all kinds of stuff, you know, cannibals, this, that. Besides them and the regular hairy Bigfoot sort of guys, there's, yeah, you know, killer cats and bears and some other weird stuff like this. People, instead of just relying on the cell phones now and all this sort of stuff, I wish somebody would just invent a very, very simple tracking device that could be put inside of a person's, in the inside of their pants possibly, that sort of, that if they're grabbed by some Bigfoot, by some scary individual killer guy, that somehow they can press up against this, even if their arms were tied, sort of like, or maybe have it around their neck hidden, some kind of little thing where you would just press on it and immediately this will sort of send out a sort of signal out there. Because the amount of money it must cost each time to looking for all these sort of people, I'm sure you could get these things down to $5 a piece, and that range, like the ranger department, when people are going to visit there, especially young children, all this sort of stuff like this, that you could either rent these things if you couldn't afford one yourself or whatever. It would save them a massive amount of sort of stuff, and also we might get to the answer if somebody was kidnapped. We might be able to trace them to the source and now find out there's a big boulder in front of us, but once you move it, now there's a cave system underneath it, and yes, Mr. Bigfoot's taken you, sort of idea, right? And this, and I mean, because this technology exists, so there'd be no reason that, I mean, you don't want your children or anything like that for a $5 item that could probably save people, right? Another thing is that every single person, when they're going in these forests, they should have around their neck sort of some kind of emergency sort of little thing, like a string with some kind of like a pocket knife and a whistle or this sort of stuff like this. I seen that Les Strauss guy. He has some kind of emergency kit. You could be out in the woods, anything like that. But something that the killer guy, just in case they are killers, rapers, muggers, that sort of thing, or a Bigfoot guy, isn't going to get off of you easy or see it or find it threatening. See, the cell phone is a problem. Even a great ape or something like this, he may not, he might think that this is some weapon you got in your hand or something. Who knows what he thinks, right? So your phone might be dropped quite quickly, and that's the end of your possibility of being traced. But if you had sort of like if they had children's belts and adults' belts or some kind of thing like that where it's not as likely, even if it was hidden in your underwear for crying out loud, some kind of little hidden pocket or something, something to then the longer you got a chance before these sickos have got your clothes off or whatever it is that's happening here, the better chance that immediately you can press this sort of thing like this, and then beep, 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 this thing starts shooting off and they can find you, right? And sort of stuff like this. So I think there should be sort of more done in this sort of thing like this because it happens way too much. It's massively costly and it breaks people's hearts and all this sort of stuff. You've lost your family members and stuff, and all this probably could be resolved with the technology that we have now by simply sort of developing very hidden sort of things in your undergarment, like your shirt or something like that, whatever, that immediately the second that you're grabbed, that somehow you can sort of now, yeah, you know what I mean, give this thing a squeeze or do something, and also like maybe some little emergency sort of thing. Like they even sell these things in a dollar store. It's like a little compartment and it's waterproof and you can put matches in it. It's got a mirror inside of it. You'd be able to put like a little file, a sort of something that could cut you out of some rope, a little knife, weird things like that that might be useful to you besides the tracking sort of thing on it. Where if you were held by some Bigfoot monster or something else, right? That when the the mice, when the cat's away, the mice will play sort of idea. The second this goon or goons that have you captured is gone, now you have time that you could reach it because you make it in a place that it's not, you don't have to access it by your hands. You can access it by some other methodology and sort of possibly save yourself shooting the mirror beams out. Somebody might see it as they're going by, all that kind of stuff, whatever would be in it. A little knife, a sharp knife that could cut through the ropes that you're on. You could grab it with your teeth and start slicing away, whatever, right? Like that kind of idea, just something to help you out that possibly you might get out of this alive, right? And sort of stuff like that. So even with little kids, some kind of little emergency sort of thing should be sort of with them a bit better than we're not doing that properly. Just people go out and, oh, let's go for a walk out in the woods. And I mean, 10 seconds later, the kid or the lady's gone or somebody's gone, and they don't have anything, the right sort of equipment that they would require. And you could have several of these. You could have something hidden in your belt besides also around your neck. So that way, if the Bigfoot monster rip that off your neck, probably the belt's going to stay on longer, whatever, right? Like some kind of methodology like that. And like I said, this tracking chip stuff, the governments all want to chip us now like chimpanzees. Did you see that with the, I can't believe people would agree to this. I mean, it's astonishing. The people are getting weak, weak, weak. I mean, weak. I come from a direct descendants of, some pretty wild sort of leaders in ancient times, and also those guys from Ireland. They're known to be pretty feisty and stuff like this. And I mean, none of these people, they wouldn't be bowing down to having some guy telling them that they got to wear this chip wrist around their wrist just to prove that they've been inoculated or this and that. I mean, how any person could agree to this? You're out of your minds. You're allowing a government to sort of eventually control you like a pile of chimpanzees. I mean, should never happen under any circumstances, no matter what. Even if three-quarters of us die, our freedom's better than to be run by a bunch of chimpanzees. But these people, oh yeah, just put on the thing. I'll finally agree with it. Yeah, I can. And now the government's monitoring every fart that you do as you're walking around. I mean, mind-boggling stuff. But in a case like this in a forest, when you can put it on and only put it on while you're there, and then you can get rid of it later or give it back to them, right? Then that kind of technology is fine in that sense because you're doing it for real for a purpose to protect yourself, not for some government to lead you like a chimpanzee sort of idea, right? So just things to think about, but that's another thing. The whole Corona thing's is insane, including these guys keep lying every 5 minutes of the day. The vaccine and all these people are, yay! I got the vaccine. You guys are again. That's another sort of thing. I mean, this thing is not a real normal vaccine. Nobody knows what it's going to do to them. There's been all kinds of cases where people have instantly died within minutes of taking it, all kinds. And if you actually measure out the percentage of sort of sickness, death, or some weird sort of thing to it already, compared, it's not much difference than the percentage of the people that are dying from the regular sort of way. So the point is that here you're taking such a risk like that for something that these things were not tested, not properly enough. You have no idea what they're going to do to you in the future or anything like that. Many is probably already have it and probably already have sort of antibodies that can fight the thing. And it's sad that a certain portion of them get really sick, and yes, it's mutating and this sort of thing like that. But the thing is that until these things can be proven more sort of safe like this, I mean, how people just rush up and want to get this in a second, thinking this is going to save their life when there's all these bizarre complications to it and no proof whatsoever so far that these things actually will even protect you from it anyways. It's just sort of they're hoping that it will. But this virus keeps mutating by the second, thanks to the true Glowians out there that just allow people in every second of the day or night, and all over the place, right? If we had to shut the borders the first time that this was ever seen, and that was it, all of us could have just handed the airplane companies some free money and say, oh, we feel sorry for you billionaires, here, have $10 each. They could have just sat on their rump for the next year. Nobody would have gotten it. It would have vanished. It would have been the end of it. But instead, big greedy business and people and the true Glowians wanting to smuggle in all their sort of buddies to get more voters for him in the future and all this sort of his mandates, right? And not caring about his own citizens and then having them locked up after and quarantined constantly here. This is what your leaders cause for you, right? Completely all there's sort of like every one of these sort of people should be ashamed of themselves that this virus was known well a year in advance before it ever was shown in the news sort of thing. It was already reported to governments, and many of these people they showed after that they have investments instantly and were already investing in these masks and all these sort of terrorist stuff way early and sort of advanced. And these are your big hero politicians that you love, right? That you voted for. Right? But I mean, this is factual. I mean, all in many states and provinces and stuff like this, we have these sort of characters that are floating around. Who knows how many of them do this, but I mean, but the point is that these guys knew way in advance of this sort of thing. There's a pile of people that don't want it to go away because they're making a fortune, and the rest of society is going to keep collapsing, and we're all going to be soon bankrupt if you don't stop. And so there's a lot of stuff that's being thread to the public that probably isn't as reality, right? Same with the masks. I mean, how is it that constantly it keeps increasing the so-called every second more people are getting it, yet I don't see any people without masks anywhere when I'm walking outside. They have been following the rules. I mean, a vast majority of them. And even the ones that aren't, it doesn't matter. This mask is supposedly supposed to be protecting you. So then you shouldn't be worried about what they're doing or not anyways. But obviously it doesn't, right? And I don't believe any of these masks do. I mean, below zero. I think people are being roped in. I wear it anyways, just because that's what they want you to sort of, sort of that's the thing. It keeps everybody calm, but in reality, I kind of doubt these masks protect much. I believe that easily any sort of virus could go through them. Viruses are microns, like they're very, very small stuff here, and they can easily go through all those sort of things, right? There's also a lot of scams going on now. They're even get a load of this, and my psychic buddy had said this. He said, I guarantee you they'll start selling like hello sanitizers and all this, and he was right. So they're even taking, terrorizing the hello gang here, and sort of convincing them that regular sort of, alcohol stuff would be devastating and non halal. So, get this this halal approved, killer spray that'll get rid of the corona for you, right? And I mean, so these people are gobbling it up and paying 10 times the amount for the stuff just because it's halal approved. It'd be fun to know the owner of that company there, True Glow, True Glow. That's what it was another time about him. I don't even want to talk about that character. That's Sean Gee's thing. And mine. But anyways, we'll continue on here. But it is interesting, eh? And there's a lot of weird stuff going on in our world. But I hear that this poor girl in 1921, this girl had left school. And here's the ones I talk about where I sort of collected these over the years because I found it interesting that here this girl, okay, she's walking along and her school teacher was right there in the school. The little girl's walking. She's walking and there's a forest on both sides of them and certain thing like this. And you're walking back from school. She just walked along the road. Poof, she vanished. Never to be seen again. And they went and scoured this area with 10 zillion sort of people and all kinds of stuff like that. It got quite a bit notoriety about it at the time. Never to be seen again, right? And these sort of stuff like that. There's so many of these sort of ones where they're bizarre, where it's seemingly like some kind of predator or human or whatever, right, was waiting along and all of a sudden, grabbed you and yanked you into the bush sort of idea, right? And I mean, so these things have been happening all over the place. And I mean, you could do whole sections besides the David Paulides one. You could do Mystery 411, the hoods, right? And I mean, the same thing occurs in these kinds of stuff, and a lot of people do vanish mysteriously. They're very strange here. Like here, there was this young fellow named Lawrence in the 1930s had vanished from a car up a mountain trail in Nevada. And he was with his uncle there. Days searching, they got a native tracker because, like, first they blamed and they thought it was sort of like him, right? The parent that had sort of done it because the kid had vanished. They went up and down the trails and they did this and that and all this sort of stuff like this. And so finally, they decided to get this native tracker guy, and the dogs couldn't even track this kid, nothing, all this sort of stuff like this. And finally, this native tracker guy goes up, and there's this mountain, right? And it's like 9,000 feet sort of elevation. There's no possible way a 3-year-old child was able to sort of climb up the top of this. And get a load of this, on the top of this tiny little sort of way up this. So you got this giant straight mountain, right? Okay, like straight up sort of vertical wall here. And 3/4 way up of it, sort of way high up in the air, you got this little microscopic ledge that is sticking out that's different than the rest of the sort of, where it's sort of more straight and that sort of way. And it was a very small little spot. The guy, the native, actually attracted to this point and said, well, what the hell? He says, there's something way up there. He says, how could somebody get up that? And there's no possible way a kid could climb up such a thing. So they get to the top of this, and this kid was actually wrapped up in this tree in a way that if he tried to move or escape or anything like this, it would actually choke and kill him. So somebody or something went and actually bent a tree and did all these intricate sort of knot-like stuff around the kid to either protect the kid from falling off possibly, or to keep the kid captured there so he couldn't escape. So what on earth could really do such a thing, right? But conveniently, this is Nevada, again, right near these Lovelock Caves. A Bigfoot, sort of 8, 10 foot hairy sort of ape man, yes, would have enough strength to easily put a small child up on his shoulder somehow, grab you, and be able to climb up these sort of things because they're very powerful and they're used to climbing in caves, trees, and forests. They're different than us. They have the ability of doing that way better than what we would. There's no possible way a 3-year-old child, not only that, there was freezing at night and the child should have died. So it would make more much sense that a wild sort of ape man here sort of idea, right? The guy grabs him and he decided to hide him up there for some reason. Maybe he was going to come back and sort of once the crowd's gone, because maybe he saw all these people looking for the child and whatever. But I mean, here they actually found the child was still alive and not really harmed. So can you imagine that, right? But the thing is, it's an exact same sort of region where we already have physical evidence that there was some cave giants there. So again, who else could climb up a 3,000 foot sort of up thing like that and put this child on this little tiny cliff way up? Like, I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's just even it's so crazy that it's beyond. But I mean, it all occurred, and I mean, it actually, this native guy saved this kid, right? Thank goodness for the natives. So you're again, yeah, always calling them primitive, right? He was the only one that was able to find them, right? Sort of stuff like this. But the thing is that that's the thing is that likely, like, I mean, wild humans would have a much greater strength, right? That could traverse easily here. Like, here's another one. September 1944, Reno, Nevada. A lady with her granddaughter, 3-year-old again, while out on a ranch, she was there to get a divorce. Although searching every inch of the sort of drainage ditches, they search every single place. This girl just completely like vanished off the face of the earth, right? Not far off from there, another 6-year-old had vanished around a place called Camp Bonanza that was riddled with caves. Again, the caves. This happened in June '66 to a boy named Larry. He was never found, but they found his footprints heading to these caves. The poor mother, Sharon Jeffrey, even searched with helicopters. They finally gave up. And again, the same sort of thing, but brought to the caves. This is the answer. I'm telling you, man. These people, sort of, these wild people, there's so much of these reports of them being captured even. Like I said, I cover all kinds of them way more in depth. I'm just doing this very lightly here. But the thing is that nevertheless, these things have occurred all over the place, and tons of these mysterious vanishings where even witnesses said that they saw some giant carrying off the child. I mentioned on my other shows there of natives being captured by them, the same thing. They all say that the monster whips you over his shoulders and climbs you up and brings you into a cave. They're even telling you the same story. There was a kid they found way up in this elevation. The kid was actually alive still, and he said that some great bear or something was guarding him at night in a cave. Now, what kind of bear walks around? And the way he described it wasn't even a bear. Like, it sounded like a Bigfoot, but that's the only thing that he would know, right? And sort of thing like that. So again, you have all kinds of these historic stories, and many of them where you're finding these kids and people vanish, sometimes later even still alive, where the creature decided not to kill you. Can you imagine you're a poor Bigfoot lady and maybe you're a mother, right? And maybe you see this cute little kid and you just want to sort of say hello to them and stuff like that. And so this, what I'm saying is, it's, if they are really wild humans, a lot of them, in a lot of cases, some of them may be kind, some of them are going to be cannibals, some are going to be mean and stuff like that. But I mean, there's a lot of these ones where they found the child where they should have froze to death. It was way minus this and that, and they're not found for weeks, yet the kid's still healthy, and the kid tells you that some kind of big bear man or some strange, they'll usually describe them odd and say somebody, gave them something or kept them in a cave or did this and that. There's all these kinds of stories, right? There's just too many of these to not have some kind of validity to it. And considering so many people vanish so mysteriously where they're right on a normal path, they go around a tree and all of a sudden they're not there, this would make sense then, right? Because something like that where you have these sort of things where we're ignoring sort of historical sort of stuff here where there is these things out there and there's many of them, and maybe people should sort of think about this. But things you should think about too is that and this is quite serious stuff here. Please, like when you're out in these national forests and stuff like that, have some kind of extra emergency thing with you. Some weird little sort of a thing, like a little emergency belt that you can wrap around your sort of an extra thing that might have the sort of a little knife, a mirror, some matches, some different things to that possibly could help you devise an escape, right? And this sort of thing like that, and also to keep a fire going and all these kinds of things like that. I mean, even an extra Bic lighter with you, this sort of idea, right? I mean, all these sort of things would be helpful. I mean, even if you were sort of tied up, you might be able to get something going with some kind of thing, right? So these kind of ideas, but certainly, and also I think somebody, if you want to make some good money, I mean, considering how many people vanish in these forests and little kids and stuff like that, it'd be a lot safer if you had some kind of simple little chip-like thing where the parents now and this sort of thing like this, if the kid's tracking too far off, at least they know where they are, right? Sort of thing like that. And I hate doing that in a way and stuff like this, but in these national forests and these weird places where these things are happening, it's an awful shame, right? Where probably with just a little bit of technology that we have nowadays, we can make these things way less and that sort of thing like that. And even at that, even if some poor kid or a lady or a man or whatever got captured, we might actually finally solve the riddle and actually catch a more modern sort of version of one. We haven't just caught one in a while. But to say that the Bigfoot hasn't been caught before, like I said, I mentioned a bunch in here, there's all kinds of these historic records everywhere. And every time, conveniently, the guy's got giant long arms. He looks like a gorilla. He's this and that, even before gorillas were known, and all these sorts of stuff. It's impossible. All these people made this up. And also, a lot of times they correlate with vanishings of people missing around the area. So you got that, and you also got groups and singular human beings that are sort of feral, that, or even wealthy people that probably, I wouldn't be surprised. There's been cases like this where the guy flies into remote areas and hunts people down in other hunting cabins and stuff like that. There was this one nut there, this guy would pick up sort of hookers and tell them he was a photographer, and sort of, and he'd drag them out into these sort of wilderness, right, into some camping sort of thing, and he'd get them sort of blindfolded and make them run, and he'd hunt them down and thinking that they're going to try and escape and stuff, and he had it all rigged that they couldn't escape or see very well, and he'd have the fun of watching them poop in their pads and terrorizing them and finally doing them in, right, and that sort of stuff. So all these things are a combination together. So even though a lot of people make these things mysterious, I don't really like. I mean, there is many normal explanations. Yeah, they got wobbled off course. They got lost in the woods and now they starved to death and that sort of stuff. But many of them are actually where they're a bit too weird, where there's a good portion of them, like I'd say like 15-20% here, where they're weird. and the people's bodies are found in way far locations where the kid could have never made it that far. None of these sort of stuff, but if you were a great big 8, 10 foot sort of hairy wild person, you easily could have carried them off like that, or some kind of creature in this sort of stuff like that. So these are things out there, but just even a simple whistles, weird stuff like that. Of course, I'd tell the kid, I mean, don't whistle if the creature's right there, because unless people are nearby or something like that, because once he knows that you got this, he might rip it off from you, right? But I mean, if he was away and something like that, and you might have a chance to make the whistling, right? And this sort of thing, like whatever the case, I mean, but like some kind of little emergency sort of kits here to give somebody an extra chance that they might escape, right? And there is some weird ass stuff out there. Besides all that creepy stuff, there might even be organizations that do this and sort of sell people's body parts and all kinds of stuff. There was a case that I remember in one of the national forests there. I don't think the Politis guy ever mentioned it and stuff, because it really has nothing to do with uh, like a vanishing sort of thing. But these ladies had found this sort of abandoned, sort of weird trailer, and it was way out in the wilderness, out of nowhere. Like, I mean, this thing was there, like in the middle of nowhere, right? This great big sort of giant sort of trailer, and inside of it was hundreds of handcuffs that were welded right to the sort of wall. And so these people were, whoever was using these, were actually kidnapping all kinds of people and holding them there. Like this is like some kind of slavery like thing where you grab a bunch at once, right? And this is going on in our national forest here, right? Wasn't Yosemite? Which one was that again? Oh my God, Glacier National Park. So, like, I mean, that sort of thing like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff out there. So, yeah, I hate talking about this kind of stuff because it makes me sad, and I mean, that sort of stuff like that. But I just want people to understand that Bigfoot is not imaginary. There is wild humans living amongst us. This is a fact. I mean, no matter what anybody says otherwise, historic records for thousands of years prove that even if one of these tales were true, yes, a wild man has occasionally came down from a cave and grabbed a human being and raped and killed them or done different stuff with them. And this is highly likely what does occur in some of our national forests. And I mean, there was one I watched. There's this guy. He's right into this missing 411. I just started catching some of his shows there. I've never had a chance to read all the David Politis stuff, and this guy's right into it. He loves talking about it, and all that sort of stuff, and that sort of thing. So he's fun to watch. Mr. Boland or so. He's a former sort of a Marine, sort of a Navy SEAL sort of guy, right? So the guy knows how to sort of handle himself and all that sort of thing, and he loves all that sort of thing. And he mentions some very interesting cases. He talks about all that kind of stuff like that. So if you like those sort of stuff, there's certainly 5 million that he does that I don't cover, and he covers some like way more thoroughly. I just wanted to talk about this sort of the whole scope of it, not so much like every individual case and all the mystery of it, but that for people to state that, yeah, you know what I mean, Bigfoot's a new phenomenon, is made up, or all this kind of stuff, when constantly people have been reported missing since time began, constantly the parents are warning you in native villages to stay away from the cave because some kind of caveman monster lives there. To keep denying this, it seems bizarre because the evidence is too much for it, right? There's tens of thousands of references for it and correlations of people vanishing and being found later in bizarre spots that no human could have went there unless some giant human or something really weird there brought them there, right? And that sort of thing. So it all adds up. It adds up much more that way than just to simply say, oh, it couldn't be. We would have caught one by now. No, you might not have, right? Because they live up in a mountain cave. They can see you coming from miles away. They disappear, right? And the ones that spring up on people, they come from behind sort of the trees and stuff like that. They also have some of them seemingly their hair helps them actually blend and camouflage really well. That's another sort of interesting aspect. There's all kinds of stuff, the Bigfoot phenomena, that agitates me with these people that are claiming they're Martians and this and that, or that they're specters and they're ghosts and all this. This is complete hogwash. I can understand there's just as many tribes that completely say he's a wild human and that he's one of their other relatives or brothers from long ago. There's just as many of them, if not way more so, than some of the smaller amount of groups and native tribes that give him supernatural powers and all that kind of stuff. I can't say any of these things aren't true, and I absolutely love Native people. I love their stories and fully know that they're telling the truth. But it has nothing to do with that. I'm just saying they may perceive some of these things in there that may or may not exist, but nevertheless, the Bigfoot exists, right? And it's all your vision on how you want to perceive it, right? But I mean, when you start getting in UFOs mixed into it and ghostly stuff, you're wrecking this sort of, because I mean, people want to get to the truth. And I mean, it's much more likely, since there's physical evidence in the ground, crushed giant 2-3 inch footprints in the ground, 10 zillion of these now that have been found, some with dermal ridges. We got all kinds of bizarre hair samples, including some that have never been identified, and all kinds of weird things like this. So we have physical evidence. Also, there's no way that UFO people, if you're a Bigfoot UFO guy from outer space, you're intelligent enough to fly some great and extraordinary machines that can fly across the universe, yet now you land on our Earth and come down as a chimp man and go ooh and hang out in a cave. I mean, this is ridiculous. Would it not be more likely that UFOs are seen constantly every day across North America and the world's skies, right? So just because a UFO was seen around the same time as a Bigfoot, the one may have below zero to do with each other. It also could be, like I said, that UFOs actually study all creatures, and they may also study Bigfoot. But the correlation of that and the Bigfoot coming from the ship is so retarded to me that I just, so I get agitated with this because I think these are just a lot of sort of people out there that want to write a book about, imagination, that they correlate this just to sell 10 copies. But I mean, really, it's not reality. I mean, the real sort of stuff is physically. We have tons of evidence out there, 10 zillion tracks by now, that even if 1% of them were real, consistently since time began, including fossilized tracks of giant footprints and all kinds of stuff, that yes, some kind of big humans walked amongst us, right? We have these sort of things like this, but the other way to sort of this other stuff, when you're adding these extra things, you're making it harder for the regular researching to go on. So I just I wish people would stop with all the extra super, because he's not supernatural. He's just extremely good at blending into his environment and hiding. That's what they do. And yeah, if you saw a UFO, maybe the UFO was staring at you and him. Maybe they want to analyze how scared you're going to poop your pants when you see Bigfoot. How do you know? But anyways, I can tell you this much. Bigfoot is not a Martian guy, right? And he's not a ghost. There may be such thing as a ghost to Bigfoot, because, like I said, I actually believe a couple of times in my life I've seen a ghost-like sort of stuff, right? As sort of things like that. A few other things that seem ghostly, but I'm not sure. But twice I saw something really weird that I cannot explain, right? Like, really explain. Like, but I mentioned about the Banyan witch, the girl disappeared, like what the ghost did, but that's different. I know she was a physical, real sort of human being here, and somehow how she vanished, I have no idea. But the thing is that that's something else. That's not a ghost. That's magic or supernatural or some kind of trick or some weird illusion or something that happened there, right? But that's one thing. But like ghosts, like stuff like that, yeah, these things may exist, but they certainly are not what most people see most of the time. These are physical, real sort of creatures where you're getting them on film, like once in a blue moon, very rare, real ones, but there's a few now, and that sort of thing like that, and also, I suspect too that there is wild, crazy people besides the regular redneck Bubba killer guys that are out there and stuff like that. But there's also probably shaman like people that do this as well. This is well known that even native cultures and stuff like that, some of them dress up like wolves and other sort of stuff like that. And some of these people may be a killer as well. And they would be very good at stalking up at you because they're wilderness people. They live in the wilderness all the time. And that's just another thing to think about. But seriously, the Bigfoot phenomena does have tons of credible sort of stuff to it that it's not possible, it's all imaginary. So, proudly stand by yourself and say, yes, I analyze the evidence and sort of stuff like this, and it's more probable that it's real than it's not. Because really, the only thing you have to say that it's not is because you haven't seen one in the forest, you haven't been there, and it just can't be. That's the only proof you have on your side, right? To say that he doesn't exist. The other way, you have 10 zillion references from ancient historians from thousands of years ago. There was even like a Roman wild man that used to exist in the cave systems there. And some of the earlier sort of poets, everybody else talk about them, right? So in every system worldwide, always the same. There has been groups of people, feral or not, or whatever, hairy, non-hairy, ogres, bigger, smaller, all sorts, that have chosen to live in a cave-like sort of system. And they, because they are human-like of some sort, right? They will, seeing a maiden or somebody they think is cute or a little child or this sort of stuff, may sort of want them for different reasons, right? So these are things to think about. But anyways, it's just another bizarre sort of topics here that I just wanted to cover loosely and stuff like that. Sadly, like I said, I still have problems with this sort of doing it this way, even though it's a lot faster, it seems to make some mistakes, and I don't like how some of the presentation goes. It's hard to sort of read some of the sort of stuff, and constantly you always get a spelling mistake or two per page. Here we go again. There's one there. But anyways, like I said, I'm not going to redo that. It's a very small amount, but it is annoying. But anyways, so I'll try and figure this out better. Maybe put it up on a bigger screen somehow, and or do something with it that I can sort of fix this up a little bit. But anyways, hopefully just give you an idea that there's a lot of interesting things out there, and that sadly our forests are in trouble. Our whole world's in trouble with our pollution and everything else we're doing. But besides that, when you're in national parks like that, don't turn your head on your children ever. Don't. Just if anything I've ever said to you is, I hate to even see one more child or some lady or some guy go missing. I mean, don't go up on your own. Don't wander up on the side roads. Don't do weird stuff that people like. Make sure that you know what I mean, when you're doing things, that you're doing what you're supposed to do, right? And that sort of stuff, so people can find you, right? So even if it isn't a bad Bigfoot monster or a giant bear or Godzilla didn't come out of the woods, or God knows what the hell's living in our forests, right? And creeps and clown groups and stuff like this. Speaking of that, there's even those wackos. There was this abandoned, these teenagers had found this abandoned sort of old farm way out in the middle of this forest. They were camping and stuff, and they decided to just check it out. And there was actually a group of insane clowns that was living in it, and they started terrorizing them. These kids had all take off when they phone the police and everything, right? But I mean, there was a whole group of these cult-like clown guys living in there, and they had weird death stuff up on the walls and all kinds of stuff like that. One other thing, that this is something that I actually saw this, and I mean, this fascinated me. This was right here in our Ottawa region here, the weirdest sort of thing. And there was kids and stuff that was been missing around here in the past and stuff like this. And so I was with this lady, and she actually phoned this sort of, I guess they might have investigated. She stopped working over at this place after a while, but we had went for this walk, and we were down along the sort of this the small river here in the region, and we were going around this bend, and she said, "Oh, look at the nice flowers in there." And there was this little pushway in a sort of in this big, thick sort of growth. And she starts pushing through there, so I started walking with her. I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Oh, I just want to look at these flowers, all this kind of stuff like this." And we're going along. All of a sudden, in this sort of weird sort of area, there was this bazaar. It was like one of those Bigfoot huts that you see sometimes. Somebody had taken giant vines, and literally thousands of them, and made this sort of like almost like an igloo, like sort of a tent, but completely out of these thick vines and sort of stuff like this. Now here's what creeped us out. In at the front of this sort of place, there was some young person's boot there, and it was slashed, a rubber boot. And when we went inside, we poked our head into this sort of thing. There was newspaper articles stuck up on the side of it with sort of weird stories about people missing and weird stuff like that. This creeped the living crap right out of us. So we went back to this sort of office, and this lady went and sort of dealt with them, right, and said, "Hey, we saw this weird sort of thing like this." So I never heard anything about it again. And I mean, you would have thought that, I mean, if they hadn't found anything big, but there was some hermit or some strange guy here living right in amongst us. And I mean, nobody'd ever see this guy. It's just by a fluke in a million that we just happened to, because she wanted to see these wild flowers. There was a case, as I mentioned in one of my other shows, in this great big sort of park that literally they had over 100,000 visitors a year. And park officials with tons of them working there and mowing lawns every day and doing everything right in the center of the park, not in a forest, not anywhere. There was a little sort of round bushy sort of area like this, right, and that sort of thing. And this girl went to go to the bathroom on the edge of this sort of bush, and this hairy wild man came out and scared her. So that they got the posse, and the police finally came and all this sort of stuff, and they started pushing their way through it. And here there was a great big farm right in the center of it, and this guy had cows and everything else, and he had no idea that any human beings ever lived there, and we had no idea that he was there. Yet it's a great big farm. So if you're telling me that all kinds of everybody in the planet, over 100,000 visitors right in the park, and you're walking by this every single day, and you can't even find a farm, well, then obviously a Bigfoot probably could hide from us. And so I think we give ourselves way too much credit. But the second we're in a forest, within 2 seconds, a forest is a forest. And I mean, a creature could be hiding 10 feet from you, and you're not going to be able to see them a lot of times. That's the way it really is, right? So, anyways, stay tuned for some other shows that are coming up. This one wasn't the sort of, I just wanted to cover a little bit about how strange sort of some of the things that is going on here, and what's, it makes me sad, right? But the thing is that these things do occur out here. And for sure, there is wild people living amongst us. And for sure, there is more to Bigfoot than what Joe Nichols wants you to believe. So anyways, so stay tuned for another show there, and hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you have any cryptozoological sightings, you can contact me there. Here's the website. So have a great evening, and take care, and bye for now.